There is a portrait of a woman in a long pink dress hanging on a wall inside a small beach house in Delmarva, and the boy who lives there has been looking up at her for as long as he can remember. He calls her his mother. He has her gem set into his belly. He has her hair. He has her healing tears. He has her sword tucked away inside the mane of a pink lion that nobody can quite explain, and he has almost none of the truth about who she actually was. Tonight on Futuro, we are going through the entire story of Rose Quartz, all of it, the lie at the very beginning, the rebellion, the love, the death that was not really a death, and the son who had to carry every piece of it. So get comfortable, dim the lights, settle in, and if you have not subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. To understand who Rose Quartz was, you have to start before there was a Rose Quartz at all. You have to start with a small pink figure standing in a vast white room being told no. The character we eventually come to know as Rose was never originally a quartz at all. He was Pink Diamond, the youngest of 4 diamonds who ruled an empire of light and stone that stretched across an unknown number of star systems. The Diamond Authority, as the show calls it, is a hierarchy of immortal alien matriarchs. White Diamond sits at the top, a kind of cold and luminous mother who governs through certainty. Yellow Diamond runs the military arm of the empire. Blue Diamond presides over what looks like emotional and judicial authority. And Pink Diamond, the smallest, the newest, the last to be created, sits beneath all of them, in theory equal, in practice patronized, indulged, and quietly managed. In the show's chronology, this hierarchy has existed for what is implied to be many thousands of years before the events on Earth. Pink, by comparison, is very young. She is, in a way the series goes out of its way to underline, the only diamond who has never run her own colony, and she is the one being told, again and again, that she is not ready for one. The reveal that Rose was pink came late in the show's run, in a 5th season episode called A Single Pale Rose, and it reshaped almost everything that came before it. Until that moment, we had been told, by Pearl, by Garnet, by Greg, by Rose herself in old recordings, that Rose Quartz was a single rare quartz soldier on Homeworld, who looked at the planet Earth and refused to let it be turned into another lifeless gem colony. The show let us live with that version for hundreds of minutes of television. It let us love her as that. And then, in the space of a single quiet bedroom scene, Pearl steps inside her own forehead gem, takes Steven into her own memory, and shows him the truth she has been carrying for thousands of years. Pink Diamond, standing in a room on Homeworld, frustrated, denied her colony, hatching the only plan she can think of, to become someone smaller, someone unimportant, someone she could disappear inside. The argument the show is making here is something it returns to over and over. Power, in this empire, is not something you have. It is something you are. A diamond is a diamond from the moment of her emergence. A pearl is owned. A ruby is a foot soldier. A quartz is a warrior. There is no climbing. There is no quitting. There is no being something else. Pink Diamond, born into the very top of that pyramid and yet powerless inside it, does the one thing the system never plans for. She steps off the pyramid and disappears down inside it. She becomes a quartz. She becomes the kind of soldier she might once have ordered around without ever learning her name. And in doing so, she sets in motion a story that ends, thousands of years later, with a boy on a beach, alone with the consequences. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, and one of the things the show is very careful about, even as it withholds information, is sequence. So let us walk forward slowly. Pink Diamond, as we see her in flashbacks scattered across the 5th season, is loud, restless, prone to tantrums, openly affectionate, openly bored. She has a pearl of her own, a small, slender figure who later in the show turns out to have been a separate character entirely from the playmate by most accounts that the other diamonds also gave her in those early years. She has been promised a colony for what the dialogue implies has been a very long time, and whenever she presses for it, the older diamonds find a reason to delay. They give her a zoo to play with, a small habitat carved into an asteroid where they keep captive humans descended from the people Pink originally collected from Earth in the Empire's first scouting visits. They build her a palanquin. They humor her. They never quite let her go. The implication, never stated outright by the show but heavily underlined, is that the older diamonds love her in a way that is genuine and also entirely possessive. They do not trust her with anything real. They do not believe she will be careful. And so they keep her close, and the closer they keep her, the more she pushes back, until eventually a colony is granted, and that colony is Earth. In the show's terms, this is the original sin. Earth is given to Pink Diamond as a project, a planet to be hollowed out, mined of its resources, and used to produce new generations of gems inside its crust. The injection process, which we see in great detail in the first and second seasons, involves planting gems in the ground and letting them grow at the cost of every organism on the surface. It is a planet death sentence, dressed up as routine industry, and Pink Diamond, at first, accepts the assignment exactly the way the Empire would expect her to. She arrives in her palanquin, she gives her speeches, she tours the project with her court, and then, somewhere between those tours, she walks out into the actual landscape of the planet she has been given, and she sees the living thing she has been told to kill. We never get a single scene of the moment her mind changes. We get scattered glimpses across many episodes. We get her in a cave on the moon base, looking down at a world full of weather and animals. Get her in a flashback, hiding among trees, watching organic life happen around her in a way she has never been allowed to watch anything. And we get, eventually, the decision. She's not going to let this happen. The first attempt is not yet a rebellion. The first attempt is a request. The show implies, through flashbacks shown in the 5th season episode, "Now We're Only Falling Apart," that Pink genuinely tries to ask the other diamonds to spare the planet, to find another world, to do the project somewhere that does not already have life on it. And the answer she gets, particularly from Blue and Yellow, is the same answer she has been getting for as long as she has been alive. No. Sit down. You do not understand what you are asking. You are too young for this. We know best. There is something quietly devastating about the way the show stages that conversation. Pink is at the center of an enormous chamber, towering over almost any other character we have seen, and she is being talked down to like a child. Her sisters, if we can call them that, are not being cruel. They are being maternal in the worst possible way. They believe they are protecting her from a mistake, and in protecting her, they take from her the one thing she has ever asked for, which is a say in anything. So she does what people do when they cannot speak as themselves. She disguises her voice, she walks down off the platform of being a diamond, and she puts on a different shape. The show is careful, especially in the reveal episodes, not to give us a tidy origin story for Rose Quartz, the form. We do not see a montage of Pink experimenting in a mirror. We do not see her practicing a different voice. What we see is the result. A tall woman with a great mass of curly pink hair, a flowing white dress, a gem on her stomach where Stevens is now, and a soft, low, calm voice. The form she chose is, in many ways, the opposite of the form she had. Pink Diamond was small and angular and high-pitched and electric. Rose Quartz is tall, soft, slow, and warm. The interpretation the show seems to invite is that this was not just a tactical disguise. It was a wish. She was making the version of herself she had not been allowed to be. And here, very early in this story, we have to introduce the second figure in it, because Rose Quartz did not invent herself alone. From the moment of her emergence onto the rebellion side of the war, she had Pearl with her. Pearl, as the show eventually makes clear, was originally Pink Diamond's own Pearl. In the Homeworld system, a Pearl is not a soldier or a leader. A Pearl is a custom-made servant, an accessory, a status object. Each high-ranking gem has one. Pink Diamond had hers, a small, slender figure with a pointed nose and a gem on her forehead, who stood beside her at court and held her things and existed, by design, to reflect her owner. When Pink decides to become Rose, the only other person who knows the truth is that Pearl. The two of them walk off into the planet together. They become a pair. And from that moment, the show implies Pearl is no longer anyone's accessory. She is Rose Quartz's first soldier, first confidant, and, in a way the series spent years quietly establishing, first and most devoted love. The episode the fandom usually points to as the center of this, although the show drops hints across many earlier seasons, is a flashback episode called We Need to Talk, set in the 1980s on Earth, where Rose, Pearl, Greg, and Garnet appear together in a recording studio. We see Pearl jealously trying to interrupt Rose and Greg by fusing with Rose in front of him as a kind of statement. The fusion is called Rainbow Quartz, and the moment when Greg flinches at it is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the early run of the series, because it is the first time we understand that Pearl has been in love with Rose for thousands of years, and that Rose has not always returned it in the way Pearl has hoped. The show does not say outright whether Rose ever loved Pearl back in that particular way. Different episodes can be read differently. But what is undeniable in the canon of the show is that the bond between them was the original bond, the one that everything else was built around, and that Pearl was the only being in the universe who knew Rose's real name and was forbidden, by Rose's command, from ever saying it. That command is one of the most important pieces of the entire story, and one of the cruelest. The show implies, especially in A Single Pale Rose, that Rose, before going to Earth in full, ordered Pearl never to tell anyone she had once been Pink Diamond. Not for a year. Not for a century. Forever. Pearl, who as a pearl is essentially designed to follow orders, took that command into herself and could not undo it. For thousands of years she carried that truth alone, unable to speak it, unable to write it, unable even to mime it. We see in fragments Pearl visibly trying to tell Garnet, trying to tell Stephen, trying to tell anyone, and her own body locking up around the words. It is, in retrospect, one of the most quietly horrifying premises in any modern animated show. The most loyal friend Rose ever had spent thousands of years carrying a secret she could not say on Rose's orders, and Rose then died without lifting that command. What the show keeps suggesting here, very quietly, is that even at her best, even at her most loving, Rose Quartz had inside her the reflexes of the empire she came from. She knew how to give an order to a pearl, and she gave one she should never have given. But again, we are skipping ahead. In the early years of the rebellion, the order has not yet been given. There are only two of them, a diamond pretending to be a soldier and her pearl pretending to be free. The next person they pick up is, on paper, an enemy. Bismuth, a tall blue gem with arms like an anvil, was a builder, a constructor of arenas and warp pads, a worker. The show is not entirely explicit about how she joined, but we know, from a Steven Universe Future episode called Bismuth Casual, and from her debut earlier in the series, that she was one of the very first to follow Rose. She built the crystal gems their forge in a volcano. She built their weapons. She built, eventually, a sword for Rose herself, which is the same sword we see Stephen and Connie use over and over again in the present day. Bismuth believed in the cause completely, and, in a turn that becomes important later, Bismuth was also the first member of the rebellion to push it toward something Rose was not willing to do. We will come back to Bismuth because what happens to her is the first crack in the picture of Rose Quartz the show ever shows us. The next figures to join, and the ones whose origin the show treats with the most tenderness, are the two gems who eventually become Garnet. In an early second season episode called The Answer, the show stops the present-day plot completely and lets Garnet sit down with a young Stephen on the floor of his bedroom and tell him a story. The story is hers. She was not always one. She was, originally, a ruby and a sapphire, two gems on opposite ends of the Homeworld hierarchy. A sapphire is rare, valuable, an oracle, a courtier. A ruby is common, expendable, a foot soldier. They met on Earth during the rebellion when the sapphire was being escorted by a trio of rubies to a meeting with Blue Diamond, and rebels attacked the meeting. In the chaos, the sapphire was about to be struck, and the ruby instinctively jumped in front of her, and the two of them fused, by accident, into the form we now call Garnet. Fusion between two different kinds of gems was, at that point in Homeworld culture, taboo. A ruby and a sapphire fusing was, in the show's words, considered impossible, an aberration, a thing that should not exist. Blue Diamond ordered the ruby shattered. They fled together and ended up in a forest where Rose Quartz found them. The line the show gives Rose, although I will paraphrase rather than quote precisely, is essentially that they are already perfect, and that what they have is real love. They go on, from that moment, to live almost their entire existence as Garnet, only unfusing on rare occasions of extreme stress. This scene is, in the show's interpretation, the moral center of Rose's rebellion. Not a battle, not a speech, but a moment of telling two frightened soldiers that the thing they were taught was wrong about them was the most beautiful thing they would ever be. It is also the scene the show uses to define what Rose was at her best. She did not, in this version of her, want to take over Homeworld. She did not want to destroy the diamonds. She wanted, the show implies again and again, a world where gems were allowed to be whatever they grew into being, rather than the thing they were assigned at emergence. Earth, in her project, was not the prize. Earth was a laboratory for that idea. A place where a ruby and a sapphire could be one, where a pearl could carry a sword, where a bismuth could build whatever she dreamed of, where a quartz, supposedly born to fight, could choose not to. The picture of the rebellion the show eventually gives us is not large. We are not shown 1,000 crystal gems marching on a diamond army. The show is very pointed about this. The crystal gems were, at any given time, a small group. The vast majority of the troops Pink Diamond was supposed to be commanding stayed loyal to Homeworld. There were defectors. There were quartzes who joined Rose. There were Rose Quartzes in particular, who came from the same kindergartens Pink had supposedly been overseeing, and who, by the end of the war, would all be punished collectively. But the war, the show implies, was less an invasion than a long, grinding civil resistance. Sabotage, ambushes, strikes on injectors. The rebellion was always the smaller side. They were always outgunned. And the only reason they survived as long as they did was that the leader of the loyalist side had, in secret, no actual interest in winning, because she was the leader of the other side too. And here is where one of the harder parts of the story has to be told carefully, because it is the part the show itself had to slowly correct as it went. In the early seasons, before the reveal, we are told a version of what ended the war. We are told that Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond. We are told this by Pearl, by Garnet, by other gems on Homeworld, by every recording. We are shown, in flashes, a scene of Pink Diamond standing in her palanquin, and a flash of pink light, and her gem cracking and falling in pieces. For seasons, we believe this happened. Crystal gems believe it. Homeworld believes it. Blue Diamond and Yellow Diamond are still grieving it in the present day of the show, thousands of years later, and that grief, the show makes clear, is real. They lost their sister. They believe she was murdered by one of her own quartzes. They have spent thousands of years carrying that loss the way only immortal beings can carry it, by never being allowed to move on. And then, the show pulls the rug. And now we're only falling apart, and a single pale rose, set near the end of the 5th season, we see what actually happened. Pink Diamond, in her palanquin, with only Pearl beside her, shape-shifted into the form of Rose Quartz. Pearl held a sword. Pink, as Rose, ordered Pearl to swing it, and when the blade passed through her, Pink's body, projected light over a hard light core, dispersed, leaving her gem unbroken, hidden inside what looked like the shards of a diamond. There were no shards. There was a single uncracked stone, pink and smooth, and a story everyone had been told to believe. The implication, very carefully built across the surrounding episodes, is that Pink staged her own assassination in order to free Earth, in order to give her rebellion a martyred symbol for her sisters to grieve, and in order to take her quartz disguise from a temporary act into a permanent home. She had decided, by that point, that she did not want to be Pink Diamond anymore. She wanted to be Rose Quartz forever. And to do that, the show implies, Pink Diamond had to die, even if her body kept walking. There is a great deal in this moment to sit with, and the show, to its credit, gives the viewer time to sit with it. The framing of the entire conflict shifts. Every speech Rose ever gave to her army about defeating the diamonds becomes, in retrospect, a speech given by a diamond about herself. Every act of mourning at the empty memorial for Pink becomes a private joke she allowed her enemies to keep. And every loyal crystal gem who fought and was poofed or shattered or corrupted, believing they were avenging a planet from Homeworld tyranny, was, on some level, fighting for a leader who had not told them who they were really fighting. The show does not flinch from how heavy this is. Several of the most painful scenes in the later seasons are the ones where Pearl, Garnet, and Bismuth find out, one at a time, that they followed a diamond into the war they thought they were waging against diamonds. But before the reveal, before the modern day, there is still a war to finish, and the way it ends is the most catastrophic event in the show's deep backstory. Around 5,000 years before the events of the present day, the show implies the 3 remaining diamonds, grieving Pink and unable to suppress the rebellion conventionally, gathered above the planet and released what the series calls the Diamond Attack. We see it in flashbacks scattered across the 1st and 5th seasons, a great pillar of light, white and yellow and blue and pink, descending onto the Earth. It was meant to destroy every gem on the planet, rebel and loyalist alike. It did not destroy them. It corrupted them. Every gem caught in the blast except a small number who were sheltered, the show implies, by Rose's own shield, was transformed into a feral, monstrous form. Their bodies became those of beasts. Their minds were scrambled. They went mad, and they scattered into the wilderness, and they were not seen again as themselves for thousands of years. The crystal gems we know in the present, Pearl, Garnet, Amethyst, and Rose, were among the very few who survived intact. Almost everyone else on the planet on either side of the war was gone or worse. This is the moment the rebellion technically wins. Homeworld leaves. The Earth is, by the Empire's standards, abandoned. The colony is dead, but the people who fought for it are also, almost all of them, dead or worse than dead. And the planet that Rose Quartz wanted to save is left in the hands of about 5 gems, 2 of whom are not from Earth at all, and 1 of whom is keeping the largest secret in the universe. The interpretation the show invites here is one of the most difficult interpretations it asks of you. Rose Quartz, in trying to save the Earth from the diamonds, set up the conditions that made the diamonds turn most of her own people into monsters. She won the war on paper and she lost almost everyone who fought it for her. And she had to live with that loss for thousands of years in a body she had built specifically so she would not be pink diamond, while every corrupted gem that wandered the planet was an old comrade she could no longer reach. That weight across the entire middle of the show is the part the writing keeps coming back to. We see, in tiny details, the way Rose tried to live in the aftermath. She bubbled the worst of the corrupted gems and kept them in the temple, suspended in pink spheres of her own power so that they could not hurt anyone and could not be lost. She kept their gemstones safe for thousands of years on the theory that someday a way might be found to heal them. The bubble room beneath the temple, which Stephen wanders into more than once across the show, is in a sense the largest single act of penance in the series. Every glowing sphere in there is a person Rose could not save. Every one of them is, by implication, someone she helped doom, and every one of them is being kept alive on the promise that something, someday, would change. The show, in its very last stretch in Steven Universe Future, makes good on that promise, but Rose herself never gets to see it. By the time the cure arrives, Rose has been gone for a decade and a half or so. In between the end of the war and the present day, there are thousands of years that the show only sketches and glimpses. The crystal gems live on Earth. They do not have a home in the way humans do. They occupy ruins of Homeworld architecture, the Sky Spire, the strawberry battlefield where so many rebels died that the place is still littered with discarded weapons. The galaxy warp where their old gates to other worlds have all been smashed except for one. They roam. They fight corrupted gems whenever the monsters come too close to a human settlement. They bubble them. They bring them home. They wait. What the show invites us to see here is that the crystal gems in the long centuries after the war were not really living. They were maintaining a vigil. They had a planet to protect and almost no one left to protect it with, and their leader, Rose, had a name she could not say, and they had a planet of strangers slowly evolving around them whom she had told them all to love. Loving humans, the show implies, was the second great cause of Rose Quartz's existence. The first was freeing gems. The second was paying attention to humans. She found them fascinating. She found them strange and brief and inventive. Across the early seasons of the show, we get tiny pieces of her over the centuries, in scraps and photographs and stories Stephen hears from people much older than him. There is the implication that she met humans across long stretches of history, that she watched empires rise and fall, that she had favorite human things, music, dancing, food, she could not eat but enjoyed watching people enjoy. There is a softness in the way Pearl and Garnet describe her in these moments that suggests she found, after the war, a way to enjoy the planet that had cost her so much. Not as a diamond surveying her colony, not as a soldier guarding a battlefield, but as a guest, almost, on a world she had decided to belong to. Then, somewhere around 5,000 years into that long vigil, Amethyst joins. Amethyst, as the show explains in episodes like On the Run and Earthlings, is not a refugee from Homeworld. She is something different, and, in a way, much sadder. She was made on Earth, inside a kindergarten in what is now called Mask Island by Pink Diamond's original colony project. She is one of the gems whose creation cost the local soil its life. She emerged late, after the war was already over, after the kindergarten had been abandoned, alone in a hole in the ground, with no one to greet her except, eventually, the small group of veterans who had won the war that produced her. Rose, Pearl, and Garnet found her in the kindergarten. They took her in. They raised her, in whatever the crystal gem equivalent of raising is. And the show is honest about how complicated that was. Amethyst, as a child by gem standards, looked up to Rose without reservation. She idolized her. She thought of her as her mother, in everything but the literal sense, for thousands of years. And in the present day of the show, after Rose is gone, Amethyst is the one who in some ways is most quietly devastated by the truth that comes out about her. Because she had to learn that the person she had wanted to be was always pretending to be that person, and that the planet she came from was, in the strict literal sense, a colony Rose herself had ordered. There is a moment in the third season episode Beach City Drift, and another in the third season episode Steven vs. Amethyst, where Amethyst's grief over not measuring up to Rose becomes the entire emotional engine of the episode. The show keeps pulling on the same thread. Amethyst believes she is a defective quartz, smaller than her kind should be, less powerful than she should be because she came out of the ground too late. What the show offers, gently through Steven, is that Amethyst was never defective. The project that made her was defective, and the leader of that project was the same person Amethyst had decided to model her entire identity on. After the reveal that Rose was Pink Diamond, this becomes almost unbearable to think about. The person who built the system that made Amethyst feel small was the same person who told Amethyst she was perfect. The same person at both ends of the wound. The show does not give Amethyst or any of the crystal gems an easy speech about reconciling this. It just lets it sit in the room. Rose, even at her kindest, was Pink Diamond at the same time, and that meant her kindness came from inside the system she had broken, not from outside it. In the long span of years between Amethyst's emergence and Steven's birth, the show implies Rose continued more or less the same routine, guarding the planet, fighting monsters, watching humans live, and somewhere in the late 1970s or early 1980s she met a young human musician named Gregory DeMaio, who performed under the stage name Greg Universe, and her story took its final turn. The way Rose and Greg meet is told to us mostly in flashback in a small handful of episodes, most importantly Story for Steven, the late first season episode We Need to Talk, and the second season episode, Greg the Babysitter. In the version Greg tells Steven in Story for Steven, he was on tour, a young man with a van and a guitar and a small, modest single he was promoting, and he stopped to perform a show in a town called Beach City. The audience was almost empty except for one tall pink woman with very curly hair, watching him from the boardwalk. After the show, she came over, asked him about Earth, asked him about music, and treated him as if he were the most interesting thing she had ever encountered. Greg, who is in the present day of the show a soft-hearted, middle-aged man with thinning hair in a van he still lives near, was at that point a young man being looked at, for the first time in his life, the way some people are only ever looked at once. He fell in love with her, the way the show frames it, almost immediately. The way the show frames her love for him takes much longer. Rose Quartz, the show makes clear in scenes, scattered across the later seasons, had loved humans before. There is a strong implication, particularly in the second season episode Greg the Babysitter, that she had been close to other humans across her long life. She had watched generations of them be born and grow old and die. She had, by her own admission, treated humans the way a much older being might treat a fascinating short-lived creature, with affection that knew it was temporary. The challenge Greg presented to her, the show implies, was that he did not want to be a fascinating short-lived creature to her. He wanted to be a person to her. He wanted to be loved as he was, not studied as a phenomenon. And the negotiation between those two things, the long stretches where Rose loved him in her old way, and Greg pushed back and asked her to love him in a new way, is what the late first and early second season of the show keeps returning to. The episode that crystallizes this is We Need to Talk in the first season. We see Rose, Greg, Pearl, and Garnet in a recording studio. We see the four of them try to lay down a track together, ostensibly for one of Greg's songs. We see Pearl in a state of barely contained jealousy. We see Rose treating Greg with affection, but a touch of distance, the way you might treat a sweet idea rather than a partner. We see Greg eventually stop the recording and confront her and ask, in essence, whether she sees him as a person or as another short-lived creature she is fond of. The show stages this with extraordinary care. He does not yell, she does not flinch. They sit with it, and by the end of the episode, the show implies, something between them has shifted. She has decided to try to love him the way he is asking her to. He has decided to try to love her, even though she is, in some sense, not from the same world as him at all. They are choosing each other. What we know about the next stretch of their life together comes in fragments. There is a song Greg wrote called Like a Comet, which we hear Steven sing in pieces across the show, a song about waiting for someone who burns bright and brief. There is the implication that they spent years together, in the van, on the road, around Beach City. There is Greg's cousin, Andy DeMaio, an extended family member we meet in the fourth season episode Gem Harvest, who disapproved of Greg's choices in life, and from whom Greg became estranged in part because of their relationship. There is the way Greg, even now, decades after Rose's death, lights up when he talks about her, and the way the show is careful never to undercut the genuine love between them, even as it slowly reveals everything else. And then there is the question of the pregnancy, which is, in the literal terms the show eventually sets out, the question of Steven himself. The show, across many seasons, makes the mechanics of Steven's existence very specific. Gems are not biological in the way humans are. They are forms of light and consciousness projected by a gemstone. They cannot, in the ordinary sense, have children. What Rose Quartz did, the show implies, was something no gem had ever done before. She decided to put her own gemstone, her own essence, into a being that would be partly hers and partly Greg's. The result of this is the show is very specific about it, Stephen. Stephen's existence required Rose to give up hers. The instant Stephen was born, the instant the gem on Rose's belly became the gem on his belly, Rose Quartz ceased to exist. There is no version of the show in which Rose comes back. There is no body in storage. There is no spell that brings her back. Stephen is, in a sense, the show refuses to soften what is left of her. The scene in which this is told to Stephen, in pieces across many episodes, but most pointedly in Lion 3, straight to video in the first season, is one of the quietest scenes in the early run of the show. Stephen finds, in the hidden pocket dimension inside Lion's mane, an old VHS tape, recorded by Rose for him before he was born. He plays the tape. We see her, sitting in front of the camera, very pregnant, holding a small video camera that Greg is operating off frame. We see her speak to her future son. She tells him that she cannot wait to be a part of him. She tells him that when he is born, she will not be there to meet him, that she will be him, that every interesting human thing he is going to see, she will be seeing for the first time too, through him. The way Stephen sits with that tape, alone, watching his mother address him from before he existed, is the show in one of its purest moments. He is being told, gently and on purpose, by a person he has never met, that the price of his existence was hers, and he has to carry it. There is a great deal of theology, although the show does not call it that, in the way Rose talks about Stephen on that tape, and in the way the other crystal gems talk about him in the early seasons. Pearl, in the first season, treats Stephen as a kind of trustee, as the small temporary container in which Rose has been pleased to put her gem for a while. She does not, at first, treat him as a separate person. She slips, more than once, and calls him Rose by accident. Garnet, who is more grounded, treats him as a person from the start, but even Garnet is shaped by the loss. There is a recurring grief in the way they look at him in his earliest appearances, the grief of people who have been told that their friend made a choice they cannot undo. The picture the show builds across years is that Stephen was born into a family that had not yet finished mourning his mother, and had no idea how to mourn her now that she was, in some ways, sitting in front of them as a small boy. Greg, alone among the family, treats Stephen entirely as Stephen from the very beginning. He raises him in his van for years. He runs a small car wash in Beach City. He plays him old songs. He tells him about Rose without pretending she is in the room. The dynamic between Greg and the crystal gems in those early years, the show implies, was strained. We get a sense of it in the second season episode Greg the Babysitter, where a much younger Stephen is briefly under the care of the still grieving gems, and Greg has to step in. The argument the show is making here is one of its most important ones. Stephen is not Rose. Stephen is Stephen. And the people who loved Rose had to learn, sometimes the hard way, sometimes well into the present-day plot of the series, that the boy in front of them is not a placeholder for the woman they lost. He is a separate person with his own face, his own voice, his own choices, and his own right not to be measured against a woman he never met. Before we get to the boy and what he had to learn, there is one more part of the rebellion that the show takes a great deal of care over, and which is, in many ways, the cleanest dark mark on Rose Quartz's record. There is the question of Bismuth and what happened to her. Bismuth, as the show eventually reveals in a third season episode of the same name, did not die in the war. She was not shattered by Homeworld. She was bubbled by Rose. The episode that delivers this is one of the heaviest the early show ever stages. Stephen, exploring inside Lion's mane, finds an unfamiliar bubbled gem in the alternate pocket dimension Rose stored things in. He brings it home, unbubbles it, and out steps a tall, broad gem they have never met. Bismuth is delighted to be back. She greets Pearl and Garnet like old comrades. They cry, they embrace, they invite her into the family. For most of the episode, the show plays the discovery as a joyful homecoming. Bismuth even forges Stephen a new weapon, a kind of breaker, a tool she calls upon to use against gems on the battlefield. And then, the episode turns. Stephen asks Bismuth, alone, why she was bubbled in the first place, and Bismuth, after a long pause, tells him. What Bismuth tells him is that during the war, she came to believe that the crystal gems would never win unless they were willing to do what Homeworld did. The injectors that turned planets into gem nurseries could be sabotaged. The colonies that fed the Empire could be disrupted. But the leaders of the Empire, the diamonds themselves, were untouchable in the conventional sense. Bismuth, in her forge, built a weapon she called the breaking point. The breaking point, in the canon of the show, is a small handheld punch with enough force to shatter a gem in a single strike. It was designed to do, to a diamond, what nothing in the rebellion's arsenal could do: shatter her, permanently. Bismuth brought the weapon to Rose. She proposed using it on the diamonds, and Rose, the way Bismuth tells it, refused. She refused in a way that made it clear she would not let the war turn into that kind of war. Bismuth, frustrated, accused her of not really being committed to the cause. The two of them fought. Rose, in the version Bismuth describes, struck her, poofed her, bubbled her gem, and hid her. And then Rose told everyone else that Bismuth had died in battle. For thousands of years, every crystal gem on Earth, including pearl and garnet, believed Bismuth had been shattered fighting for them. In the present day of the show, in that same episode, Bismuth tells Stephen this, and then tells him that she still believes Rose was wrong. She wants Stephen to give her back her weapon. She wants Stephen, the son of the leader she could not bring around, to finally agree with her. The fight that follows between Stephen and Bismuth is one of the few in the early seasons that is genuinely between two people with sympathetic positions. Bismuth, the show is very careful about this, is not painted as a villain in the simple sense. She is painted as someone whose grievance is real. What the show argues is that the rebellion never honestly resolved the question of how far it was willing to go, and Rose, instead of resolving it, hid the question by hiding the person asking it. The reading the show invites is that this was the first major lie Rose told her own people, but it was not the last, and it was very much in the same shape as all the others. When a truth threatened the version of herself that Rose wanted to be, she made the truth go away. After the reveal that Rose was Pink Diamond, the Bismuth situation reads differently again. Bismuth wanted to shatter the diamonds. Rose was a diamond. The reading the show seems to invite, although it never quite states this outright, is that Rose's refusal to consider Bismuth's weapon was not only an ethical refusal, but a personal one. She could not let her people seriously plan to shatter her sisters. They were still her sisters, even as she fought them. Even as she let her people believe she had killed one of them, she was not going to let her army carry a weapon capable of ending the others. The point, very gently made, is that Rose's loyalty to her own family of origin, the family she had abandoned, still constrained the rebellion she had built. She was, in a way that none of her gems knew, holding the war back from its own logical conclusion, because the conclusion would have required her to want her sisters dead, and the show implies she did not. The other secret Rose was holding inside the temple, and which the show takes much longer to begin to unpack, is the question of Lion. Lion is a large pink lion who appears abruptly in the first season, and who attaches himself to Stephen without much explanation. Lion has a number of unusual properties. He can teleport across continents by roaring through portals. He has a pocket dimension inside his mane, which acts as a kind of secure storage room in which we find the VHS tape, the Bismuth bubble, an old t-shirt of Rose's, and Rose's sword. The show is, for most of its run, completely silent about where Lion came from. We are told only that Rose loved him, that Lion was hers, and that he showed up at Stephen's home one day in the way a stray might. Across the show, hints accumulate. Lion's pocket dimension contains a tree on a hill in a kind of pink expanse, and at the foot of the tree there is a chest. The chest contains, the way the show eventually reveals, the few belongings Rose chose to leave behind. A photograph, the sword, a book, the tape. There is the strong implication, especially in the second season episode Lion 3, Straight to Video, that Rose specifically prepared this chest to be opened by her son after she was gone, that she knew, before she died, what she was leaving him to, that she put the truth of who she was inside Lion's mane and let him guard it until Stephen was ready, although the show is careful never to say she put the largest truth there. The largest truth, the pink diamond truth, was not in the chest. It was inside Pearl, and Rose did not leave Pearl free to share it. There is a piece of show implication, which I have to flag here as theory rather than confirmed fact, that Lion himself was once an ordinary lion in the deserts of Earth, and that something Rose did, possibly her healing tears, brought him back from death and changed him into the creature he now is. The show alludes to this, particularly in a 5th season episode about Lion's origins called Lion 4, Alternate Ending, where Stephen recovers a second tape from Lion's mane addressed to Greg, in which Rose talks about Lion's history. We hear her say that she found him in the desert, and that something about him needed to be saved. We are not given the explicit mechanics, but the strong reading the show implies is that Lion is a creature kept alive on the same kind of power that flows through Rose's healing tears, and that is now in Stephen's saliva and Stephen's tears. Lion is, in that reading, one of Rose's final acts of grace before she gave herself up to be Stephen, and her last gift to him is the lion who carries the truth in his mane. None of this is officially stated as canon in a single direct line. It is, in the show, an interpretation built across many small scenes. but it is the cleanest interpretation the show offers. We have to talk now about the temple itself, because the temple is, in some sense, Rose's most private space in the entire show, and the one Stephen inherits without knowing what it contains. The Crystal Gems Temple, the giant statue carved into the cliff above Beach City, has at its center a room that can only be opened by the gemstone matching its door. The room beneath the lighthouse, only Rose, and later Stephen, could open. Inside that room is a chamber where Rose collected, over the centuries, all of the broken or unhealable gems she could find. The show implies that this room contains gems Rose could not heal, gems shattered in the war, gems whose fragments she had collected across the planet and brought home, rather than leave them lying in the dirt. The reading the show invites is that Rose, the more thoroughly we come to understand her, was a deeply private hoarder of consequences. Everywhere there was a result of something she had done or failed to do, she gathered it up and stored it. The bubble room with the corrupted gems, the room beneath the temple with the shards, the pocket dimension inside Lion. Each of them is, in a way, a vault of grief she did not know how else to manage. The show, very gently, builds Stephen into the inheritor of all of these vaults. In the first season, he opens the door to the bubble room by accident, and the gems are nearly released. In later seasons, he sits in the bubble room on purpose, sometimes alone, looking at the bubbles, the way a small boy might sit in a room full of his mother's belongings. He inherits Lion. He inherits the chest in Lion's mane. He inherits the sword. He inherits, eventually, even the gem in his belly. And at every stage of inheritance, he is being handed something whose full weight nobody has ever explained to him, because the only person who knew the full weight is gone, and the second only person, Pearl, has been ordered not to speak. The healing, in particular, has its own story to tell about Rose, and it is a story the show takes its time with. Rose Quartz's most distinctive power, the one Stephen inherits and spends years trying to use, is that her tears have curative properties. We are told this in the first season, in the episode An Indirect Kiss, where a younger version of Amethyst's gem was cracked in a fall, and Pearl recalls that Rose used to heal cracked gemstones simply by crying onto them. The other crystal gems explain to Stephen that Rose's tears could mend a gem the way nothing else could, and that without Rose, that power has been lost on Earth. Stephen, frantic to save Amethyst, eventually discovers that his own tears can do the same thing. He cries onto her gem and it knits back together. It is, in the early run of the show, one of the small, joyful scenes that confirms he is, in some real and biological sense, his mother's son. But underneath that joyful scene, there is something else, and the show eventually gets to it. Healing has limits. Rose's healing, the show implies, across many episodes, can mend cracks in a gem, but it cannot mend a gem that has been shattered into pieces. It cannot mend corruption. It cannot bring back a personality that has been scrambled. And there is one other thing the show eventually reveals, much later in the 5th season, that she could not heal. She could not heal her own people, whose forms had become too damaged to maintain. And, as the show implies in passages spread across the 5th season and Steven Universe future, she could not heal anything inside herself. The reading the show invites here is that Rose's healing was always external. It worked on other people. It did not work on her. It did not work on the part of her that was still Pink Diamond. It did not work on the regret she carried about the Bismuth bubble, or the corrupted gems in the bubble room, or the empire she had left behind. She could not cry herself well. Herself. And Steven, the show makes very plain across Steven Universe future, eventually inherits exactly this limitation. There is a beautiful, painful through line in the show about the difference between healing other people and healing yourself. Rose mastered the first. She never even started the second. Steven, born in her place, in the same way, defaults to the first, and has to be confronted with the second over years. The reason this matters here, in a video about Rose herself, is that almost every choice Rose made in her life seems to have been a choice to fix something for someone else by sacrificing or hiding a piece of herself. She fixed Earth by hiding her name. She fixed her family of origin by giving them a death to grieve. She fixed Pearl by giving her freedom and then taking her freedom of speech in return. She fixed Bismuth by erasing her from the war. She fixed her own boredom and her own loneliness by becoming someone smaller and softer, and ultimately by giving herself up to be a son. There is a pattern here, and the show is very clear about it. Rose Quartz, even at her best, did not know how to be present as herself. She knew how to be present as someone other people needed. We have to come now to Pearl, because Pearl is the character through whom we see all of this most clearly, and because Pearl's grief is one of the longest and most patient subplots the show ever runs. From the very first episode of the series, Pearl is in mourning, She does not always look it. She is brisk. She is precise. She is occasionally smug. She fences. She lectures Stephen about how to use his powers. She organizes the temple. But under all of that, in the way the show stages her face and her shoulders, she is a person in continuing pain. The first episode of the show, called Gem Glow, in the first season, has Pearl looking at Stephen's gem with a softness that, after the reveal episodes, retroactively becomes much sadder. She is looking at the gem of someone she loved more than anything else. She is looking at it in the belly of a child she did not ask to inherit it. The first season episode that most clearly stages Pearl's grief is Rose's scabbard in the late first season, where Pearl takes Stephen to a snowy mountain on which Rose's old armory and palanquin are hidden. Pearl believes the scabbard for Rose's sword may be there. She wants to find it. She wants to find anything of Rose's. She takes Stephen to the very places she and Rose used to walk together, and in the climax of the episode, she breaks down. She lets Stephen see, briefly, how alone she has been for as long as he has been alive. She tells him that he is not Rose. She tells him that she is not sure what she is for without Rose. And then she pulls herself together, because she has been pulling herself together for thousands of years, and the show moves on, but it does not forget. The Pearl who gives fencing lessons in this episode is the same Pearl who, years of showtime later, will step inside her own gem and finally show Stephen the truth. Pearl's love for Rose, the show makes clear in multiple episodes across multiple seasons, is the largest single emotional engine of her existence. The episode Now We're Only Falling Apart in the 5th season gives us a flashback of Pearl as Pink Diamond's Pearl, sad-eyed, dressed in a court uniform, standing behind her owner. It gives us the moment Pink turns to Pearl and starts to confide in her, and the moment Pearl, slowly, begins to look at Pink as something other than her owner. It gives us the moment Pink, in private, asks Pearl to help her become someone else, to pose as her court soldier, to keep the secret forever. And it gives us Pearl's answer, which is, in essence, yes to everything. Yes to whatever you want. The show is, very gently, asking us whether Pearl, in that moment, was choosing freely. The argument the show is making, underneath the warmth of the moment, is that a Pearl ordered to do something cannot quite want it freely. Pearl loved Pink. Pearl loved Rose. Pearl loved her with everything she had. And Pearl was also a Pearl, designed to love, designed to obey, designed to mirror her owner. Whether the love was free or compelled is a question the show keeps asking and never quite resolves. What it lands on, gently, is that the love was real and the compulsion was also real, and that those two things together are part of what made the relationship complicated and part of what made Pearl's grief after Rose was gone so total. While we are on the question of what Rose left her people, we have to talk about how the show handles the early seasons with the knowledge that the reveal is coming. The writers, by their own accounts and interviews after the show's run, knew where they were going from very early on. The Rebecca Sugar storyboards, the pacing of Pearl's behavior, the way Garnet's fusion origin is delivered in The Answer, all of it was building toward the recontextualization. And so the early seasons, on a rewatch, are full of foreshadowing that nobody could have spotted in real time. Pearl's small slips around Stephen's belly, Garnet's careful avoidance of certain subjects, Rose's portrait above the door, looking down with a smile that, post-reveal, takes on a slight, quiet sadness. The first season episode Stephen's Lion is, in retrospect, full of hints about Lion's origin. The early second season episode Rose's Scabbard is, in retrospect, almost a confession Pearl is not yet allowed to make. The third season episode, The Answer is, in retrospect, Garnet talking about a story Rose was telling about a war Rose herself was secretly running both sides of. There is, in the long stretch of the show between the early first season and the 5th season reveal, a steady accumulation of evidence that something is wrong with the official story. The first major piece arrives when Homeworld returns. In the second season finale, the gems we have spent 2 seasons hearing about, the Homeworld gems, arrive in the form of a small green technician named Peridot, and a large orange and red soldier named Jasper, and a former captive water gem named Lapis Lazuli. They have come to find out what happened on Earth. They believe the crystal gems are still active, they believe Rose Quartz is alive, and they believe, very specifically, that Rose Quartz killed Pink Diamond. Each of them brings a different relationship to that belief. Peridot, who is a fairly young gem from after the war, knows Rose only as a name in old reports. Jasper, who is much older, has been waiting for thousands of years to meet the gem who shattered her diamond. And Lapis, who was trapped on Earth during the war, has more complicated feelings about everything. The arrival of Homeworld and the subsequent run of episodes through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th seasons is structured around a recurring case of mistaken identity that, after the reveal, takes on terrible weight. Stephen, who looks nothing like Rose in any obvious sense, nevertheless carries her gemstone. To other gems, the gem is the person. To Eyeball Ruby, to Jasper, to the gems who came to Earth to avenge Pink Diamond, Stephen is Rose Quartz with a different face. They keep calling him Rose. They keep accusing him of crimes he did not commit. They keep demanding that he answer for things he does not understand. And Stephen, in the early seasons, does not understand why. He thinks, at first, that they have him confused with his mother. He thinks the issue is that he is small. The show, very gently, lets the audience figure out before he does that the issue is not that he is small. The issue is that the gemstone in his stomach is the same stone that was in his mother's stomach, and that the gemstone is the only thing other gems can see. The third season episode, Bubbled, stages this perfectly. Stephen is trapped in space with a ruby, the small red gem with an eye patch who has come to find him. Eyeball Ruby, as fans call her, was a member of the squadron that escorted Sapphire on the day of the original meeting at which the rebels attacked. She has personal reasons to hate Rose. She believed Rose shattered her diamond. She has spent thousands of years patrolling for her, and in Bubbled, alone in space with the small boy who looks nothing like Rose, she asks him directly whether he is Rose, and Stephen, in a moment that the show treats with extraordinary care, considers his answer. He does not deny it. He does not affirm it. He starts to think, for the first time, that his mother and he share more than he had ever wanted to know they did. The reading the show invites is that, somewhere in this episode, Stephen begins to suspect that being his mother's son is not just a sweet inheritance but a debt to be answered for. That he is going to be billed, the rest of his life, for choices a woman he never met made before he was born. This brings us to the moment the question of who Rose really was becomes impossible to ignore. In the 5th season, in an arc of episodes that begins with Stephen voluntarily letting himself be taken to Homeworld in place of an innocent Rose Quartz, the show stages a trial. In the episode called The Trial, in the 5th season, Stephen stands in a vast white courtroom on Homeworld, accused of shattering Pink Diamond. The accuser is Yellow Diamond. The defender is Blue Diamond. The judge is white in implication and absent in person. The other Rose Quartzes from the colony, the gems Pink Diamond was supposed to be commanding, have all been bubbled in storage on Homeworld for the entire span of the war, punished collectively for the supposed crime of one of their own. Stephen is on trial in their place. The trial episode is, on first watch, a tense legal drama. On rewatch, after the reveal, it is one of the most extraordinary scenes the show ever stages, because the only person in the room who knows Stephen did not shatter. Pink Diamond is Pink Diamond, and Pink Diamond is, in some sense, the person standing in the dock, and at the same time the dead victim being mourned, and at the same time the gem inside Stephen's stomach he is technically representing. The trial cannot reach the truth because the truth is impossible to state out loud. Stephen, at this point, does not know the truth either. He thinks his mother killed Pink Diamond. He is being asked to defend her, and he does not have a defense. The trial ends in chaos. The other diamonds reveal that they have continued to bubble all the Rose Quartzes from the colony, and Stephen, horrified, vows that he will find out the real truth and that he will free them. The arc that follows leads eventually to Earth, to a small bedroom inside Stephen's house where Pearl finds him alone, and where the truth, after thousands of years, finally has somewhere to land. The episode is A Single Pale Rose in the late 5th season. It is, in execution, a very quiet episode. Stephen asks Pearl to help him find a phone he has lost. Pearl, with a strange knowing in her face, takes him on a tour through memories inside her own gem, ostensibly to retrace where she last saw it. We go with him through scenes of his recent life, then his early childhood, then back further. We see Pearl burying things in the past. We see her hiding moments she could not speak about. And finally we arrive in a chamber inside Pearl's own gem, where the oldest memory is kept. And we see, finally, the staged death of Pink Diamond. We see Pink, in rose form, standing in the palanquin, telling Pearl that she has to do it, that this is what is needed for the war to end, that this is what is needed for them to be free. We see Pearl, weeping, unable to refuse, raising the sword and swinging it. We see Pink's body disperse and her single gem fall, intact, into Pearl's hands. And we see her command Pearl, last of all, never to tell anyone what really happened, never to speak the name Pink Diamond, never to speak the truth. And then, with no warning, the memory ends, and Stephen is back in his bedroom with Pearl in front of him. And they sit there for a long time, looking at each other. Pearl does not have to explain. Stephen has seen it himself. He knows that his mother was Pink Diamond. He knows that she ordered the moment of her own staged shattering. He knows that Pearl has carried this for thousands of years on her orders, unable to speak. He knows that the gem inside his own body is the original gem of pink diamond, and he has to sit there, a boy of 14 or so by the show's reckoning, holding that. What the show invites in this scene, very deliberately, is mercy. Stephen is not angry at Pearl. He sees instantly that Pearl has been a victim of this command. He apologizes to her. He holds her. The show, at no point, makes the mistake of letting Stephen blame Pearl for any of it. The blame, as quietly as the show can do this, sits squarely with Rose. Rose, who chose Pearl as the only witness. Rose, who chose to use the sword in Pearl's hand. Rose, who chose to silence Pearl rather than free her to speak. Rose, who, even as she rebelled against the empire that owned pearls, used the conditioning of her own pearl to keep her secret safe. The argument the show is making here is one of the most painful in the entire run of the series. Rose Quartz's rebellion against the empire was real, and it was incomplete, and the place where it was most incomplete was inside her own household. There is something else that happens to Stephen in this period, although it is delivered over a longer arc and is harder to summarize cleanly. The show begins to imply that Stephen's connection to his mother's identity is not only emotional, but, in a way, physical. There is a recurring image, beginning earlier in the show but intensifying after the reveal, of Stephen being mistaken for Rose not just by other gems, but by versions of himself. The late 4th season episode Stephen's Dream is the clearest example. Stephen has dreams that are not his own. He has dreams of the pink palanquin, of the moon base, of a memorial garden full of life-sized statues. The show stages these dreams as if Stephen is, in some sense, accessing Rose's residual memory through the gem. The 5th season episode Can't Go Back, in which Lapis briefly leaves Earth, also features Stephen dreaming of standing in the field, of the wind in the grass, of someone calling him. The reading the show invites is that Pink Diamond's mind, while not exactly resident in Stephen, left grooves in the stone that Stephen can sometimes trip into. He is not his mother, but he is, in some literal sense, walking around with her old equipment, and the equipment has memory in it. This becomes most acute in the late 5th season episode Reunited and the special Change Your Mind, which together make up the climactic confrontation with the diamonds. After Stephen returns from the trial, after the truth comes out, after the bubbled Rose Quartzes on Homeworld are revealed, the question becomes what to do with the lie at the heart of the whole war. Stephen, who has been Rose Quartz's gem since birth, becomes, in effect, the only entity in the universe who can reach the diamonds. He has Pink Diamond's gem. He has Pink Diamond's residual identity in his stone. He can, in the strict logic of the show, claim to be Pink Diamond. And the question, across the climax of the 5th season, is whether he should. In Change Your Mind, the special that closes out the 5th season and acts as a kind of finale before the movie and Steven Universe future, Stephen goes to Homeworld and confronts the diamonds. He tells Blue and Yellow the truth. He tells them that their sister is gone. He tells them that the war was caused by her, that she staged her own death, and that her gem is now inside him. The response is not what they expect, or what the show expects you to expect. Blue Diamond, who has been grieving for thousands of years, looks at Stephen as if she has been given a strange and unwelcome second chance. Yellow Diamond, who has been bitter, is angrier. White Diamond, the eldest, the most powerful, intervenes, and what follows is one of the strangest sequences in any animated show of its generation. White Diamond, in a long, pale white chamber, attempts to extract Stephen's gem from his body. She believes, the show implies, that Pink Diamond is still inside the gem, and that if she can pull the gem out and let it reform, Pink will return to her. She does pull the gem out. The gem does reform. And what reforms is not Pink Diamond, it is a pink version of Stephen with his face, his voice, his small body, his clothes. He looks at Pink Stephen, the reformed gem, the way you might look at a small twin of yourself. And he says, in essence, the line the show has been building toward for years. He is not Pink Diamond, he is not Rose Quartz, he is Stephen. The argument the show is making in this scene is one of its most important ones, and it is one of the few moments in modern animated storytelling that I think genuinely earns the weight it is asking for. White Diamond, an immortal queen of an empire, has been told for thousands of years that gems are their gems, that a quartz is a quartz, that a diamond is a diamond, that what is in the stone is who you are. Stephen, a boy of 14, has just demonstrated in the only way that could possibly be persuasive to her that this is not true. The gem and the person are not the same thing. He is not his mother. He is himself. And the empire, in front of which he stands, has been built on the lie that this distinction does not exist. White Diamond does not so much accept this as crack under it. Her certainty breaks. She begins, by the end of the episode, to cry, and her cry is one of the more shocking images in the show, because it is the first time we have ever seen her seem to be a person, rather than an institution. And in that cracking, the show closes its first long arc. The Diamonds, in some sense, are reformed by Steven's refusal to be Pink Diamond. They agree, at the close of Change Your Mind, to leave Earth alone, to disband the corrupted gem armies to allow the rebellion's terms. Steven returns to Earth in triumph, the first phase of the story of Rose Quartz, as a story about war and rebellion and lies and family, ends here. But it does not end. It cannot end. Because the people who fought the war are still alive. The people who were lied to are still alive. And most importantly, the boy whose body is, literally, a piece of the woman who started all of it, is still alive, and still has to figure out who he is. The show, after Change Your Mind, takes a year off from its main arc and produces the Steven Universe movie, set 2 years after the Rebellion's official end, in which a new gem antagonist named Spinel arrives and forces all of the crystal gems, including Steven, to confront one more piece of Rose's past. And after the movie, in the Steven Universe Future limited series, the show comes back to spend 20 episodes on what should be the easy part of the story, which is the part where everyone gets to be happy, and which turns out to be the hardest part, because by Steven Universe Future, the war is over, the lies have been told, the truth has been said, the Diamonds have apologized, and Steven still has to live inside the body his mother left him, and nobody has shown him how. The Steven Universe movie, released in 2019 between the close of the original show and the start of Steven Universe Future, is the next major part of the story of Rose Quartz, even though Rose herself never appears in it. The movie begins with a kind of celebratory piece. 2 years have passed since Change Your Mind. The Crystal Gems have been working with the Diamonds on undoing the corruption that ruined so many of Pink Diamond's old colony gems. Beach City is at ease. Steven is, to all appearances, a relaxed and happy teenager. And then a small pink figure with a heart-shaped pigtail and an injector arrives in the sky and tries to drain the entire planet of life in revenge. That figure is Spinel. Spinel, the movie reveals across its runtime, was Pink Diamond's playmate, given to her by the other Diamonds long before Earth, long before Rose. The two of them, as we see in flashback, used to play together in a garden on Homeworld, dancing, laughing, hugging, doing the sort of routine that two friends invent to keep each other entertained for centuries. And when Pink, in her frustration with the other Diamonds, demanded a colony of her own and set off for Earth, she told Spinel to stay in the garden and wait. She told her, in essence, do not move. Stay here. I will come back. And then she did not come back. She became Rose. She rebelled. She died in the staged shattering. She raised Pearl into a crystal gem. She fell in love with Greg. She had Steven. She lived an entire second life. And Spinel, in the garden, did exactly what she had been asked to do. She stood there for thousands of years, long enough for the garden to overgrow her, long enough for the laughter to stop sounding like laughter, long enough to crack. What the movie is doing with Spinel is one of the show's harshest indictments of Rose Quartz. The Bismuth situation could be argued in 2 directions. The Pearl situation could be excused as a desperate command in wartime. The Spinel situation cannot be argued. Spinel was not a soldier. Spinel was not a Pearl. Spinel was a friend, and Rose, in her hurry to become someone new, left a friend in a garden for thousands of years without ever once thinking back about her. The movie is, in some sense, a reckoning with the unfeeling carelessness that was always one of the components of Pink Diamond's personality, and that survived into her Rose Quartz form. The Diamonds, the show kept reminding us, were not maliciously bad. They were carelessly bad. Rose was carelessly bad too. She loved too many people too quickly. She forgot people the way you forget a toy you outgrew. And when one of those people came back, thousands of years later, with an entire planet's worth of grievance, the only person to apologize to her was the small boy who had inherited her body. The movie ends, as Steven Universe stories so often do, with Steven offering Spinel a hand and offering, in essence, his time. He flies her back to Homeworld himself. He hands her over to the other Diamonds, who agree in their newly contrite way to be the friends Spinel deserves. But the movie does not pretend Spinel is healed. It pretends she is no longer trying to murder the planet, and that is as much as a small boy can do for a wound thousands of years old. The argument the movie is making, very quietly, is the argument the rest of Steven Universe Future will make at greater length. Steven is, more and more, going to be presented with old debts of his mother's, and he is going to be expected to pay them, and the bills will not be small. This brings us to Steven Universe Future, the 20-episode limited series that closed out the show in 2019 and 2020, and to what is, in many ways, the truest, hardest, and most generous chapter of the story of Rose Quartz. Steven Universe Future is set in the show's timeline a couple of years after the movie. Steven is 16. Beach City is in a kind of golden afternoon. Tourists come from Homeworld to see the planet. Former corrupted gems are being healed and welcomed back. The crystal gems have a school for young off-worlders who want to learn how to live on Earth. The diamonds visit. Spinel lives with them. Bismuth is back. The war is over. The lies are over. Diamonds are in family therapy in their own way. And Steven, the small boy at the center of it all, is... The show begins to make clear, not okay. The first episode of Steven Universe Future, called Little Homeschool, opens on what looks like a tour montage. Steven is showing his Homeworld students around the school. He is smiling. He is gracious. He is... The show goes out of its way to underline, exhausted in a way that the smile is barely holding together. There are dark circles under his eyes. There's a tightness in his shoulders. He is the host of every social moment in the room, and he has nobody hosting him. By the end of the first half hour, it is clear that the resolution of the rebellion has not resolved anything inside him. He has spent his entire adolescence cleaning up his mother's war, and now that the war is over, there is no shape left for him to be. He does not know what he is for. He does not know who he is when he is not solving a pink diamond problem. And the show begins, very gently, to take him apart. The middle episodes of Steven Universe Future stage this in a series of encounters, each of which is in some sense an encounter with another consequence of Rose. There is an episode called Bismuth Casual, in which Bismuth, now living on Earth in the new arrangement, takes Steven out to a roller skating night with her friends, and we see, briefly, what it might look like for the show's adults to have lives of their own, free of the war. There is an episode called Snow Day, where the crystal gems get a rare day off and try to be a family, and Steven realizes he does not know how to relax. There is an episode called Why So Blue, in which we meet two lapis lazulis still working as terraformers on a remote planet, and we see, again, how much of Pink Diamond's old labor is still happening in places Steven has never been. Each episode is a low-scale, character-driven, almost domestic story, and each of them is, in some way, asking what comes after a rebellion, when the rebellion is over and the rebellious leader is gone. The two most important encounters, for our purposes, are the ones in which Steven directly meets, or fails to meet, the figure of his mother. The first is an episode called Volleyballs, in the early run of Steven Universe Future. In Volleyball, Steven meets Pink Diamond's original Pearl, the Pink Pearl who served Pink long before our Pearl. Steven and Pearl find her at Pink's old palace, with a crack in her gem and a permanent injury to her eye that the show implies was caused by Pink Diamond herself, in a fit of frustration centuries earlier. Pink Pearl bears no resentment in the way pearls are designed not to. She is delighted to meet Steven. She is delighted to see her old comrade Pearl again. She is even, in her brittle, sweet way, grateful to Pink for the chance to serve her. And Steven, watching this gem who was hurt by his mother thanking him for being his mother's son, breaks open just a little bit further. Pearl, in this episode, also breaks open. She has spent the entire run of the show defending Rose's choices. She has, in some ways, kept her own grief tidied around the edges by insisting to herself that Rose's choices were necessary, even the cruel ones. Confronted with Pink Pearl with the literal physical scar of one of those choices, Pearl cannot defend it anymore. What the show is saying here, very softly, is that Pearl has spent her entire post-war life shielding Rose's memory from any criticism. By the time Steven Universe Future starts, that shield has cracks in it, and by the end of Volleyball, Pearl has had to admit, out loud, that the woman she loved did things she should not have done. That Pink, that Rose, that whoever she was not perfect, and that loving her does not require pretending she was. The other key encounter is the one that comes much later in Steven Universe Future in the run of episodes near the end, often known as the Pink Steven arc, which centers on a hospital visit, a confrontation with Jasper, and a slow grinding breakdown. Steven, by the end of the series, has been pretending to be fine for far too long. He has been, on the surface, performing the role of the cheerful young savior. Underneath the surface, the show implies and slowly demonstrates his powers are starting to express what he is not saying. He begins to glow pink in moments of stress. His shielding, his floating, his amplified emotions become unstable. He becomes, by visual implication, more and more like Pink Diamond as he gets less and less able to perform Steven. It is one of the most subtle and disturbing pieces of long-form animation I have seen the medium attempt. Steven is not turning into a monster because he is becoming evil. Steven is turning into a monster because he is becoming his mother. And his mother, the show is now willing to say, was not okay. The Jasper episode in Steven Universe Future Fragments is the bluntest staging of this. Jasper, who in the original show was one of Pink Diamond's most loyal soldiers, has been corrupted, healed, and is now living in seclusion in a forest, training. Steven, in the middle of his slow breakdown, decides he wants Jasper to train him. He goes to her camp. He demands to be taught how to fight. Jasper, who has always seen the gem in Steven's body for what it really is delighted. She is finally in the presence of Pink Diamond again, and a Pink Diamond who is willing to fight her. She agrees to train him on the condition that he stop pulling his punches. The fight that follows is one of the few in the show in which Steven loses control entirely. He turns pink. He shatters her. The show, mercifully, has set up that gems can be reformed from their pieces with help from a higher gem, and Steven uses his diamond power to reassemble Jasper. But the moment in which he stands over her shards is staged like a horror beat. It is the first time the show has ever genuinely suggested that Steven, in the wrong shape, in the wrong mood, in the wrong inheritance, could do what Bismuth's old weapon was designed to do, and could do it without intending to. He is, in that scene, his mother's son in the worst possible way. After Fragments, the show enters its final stretch. Steven leaves home. He runs from the family, from Beach City, from the temple. He drives Greg's old van out of town. He pulls over at one point and screams. In the second to last episode, called I Am My Monster, he loses control entirely, and his body, no longer able to contain what he has been carrying, transforms into a huge pink monster. He becomes, in literal animation, the kind of corrupted gem the crystal gems use to bubble. He stomps through Beach City. He cannot speak. He cannot be reached, except by his family physically holding him, all of them, including the diamonds, including Spinel, including everyone who loves him, telling him that he is not Rose, that he is not Pink, that he is Steven, and that they are sorry that they did not say so sooner. They have to fuse and hug a building-sized monster back into a small crying boy, and the show, having earned this, lets the boy come back. The reading the show invites in this whole sequence, very deliberately, is one of inheritance and release. Steven did not become a monster because he was bad. He became a monster because nobody, for years, had let him be a person rather than a function. He had been carrying Rose's debts since he was an infant. He had been doing the family therapy of an empire with no therapist of his own. He had been told, from before he could understand language, that his mother was the most important person in any room she had been in, and that he was, in some sense, her continuing, and that the gem in his stomach was a piece of her, and that, in some way only fully articulated in the last episodes of the series, he owed everyone he met a piece of her. And finally, in I Am My Monster, the people around him finally noticed. They climbed onto the pink shape of what their love had turned into, and they held him, and they let him cry. They let him be a boy at last. The series finale of the future is one of the gentler closing notes the show has ever produced. Steven decides to leave Beach City. He fixes his van. He says goodbye to each of the gems, each in a separate scene, each one warm and unhurried. He says goodbye to Greg. He says goodbye to the temple. He says goodbye to his future as the constant center of attention. He drives off into the country. The show implies, in that final episode, that the only way for him to fully escape Rose Quartz's shadow is to leave the town that built itself around her absence. He needs to go somewhere where the gem in his stomach is just a small stone, where the woman his mother was is not waiting around any corner. He needs to be a teenager in a van for a while. The series does not give us where he goes. It gives us only the goodbye, and the open road, and the fade to a final shot. And then Steven Universe ends. For good. That is, in the strict sense, the end of the story of Rose Quartz. But to leave it there is to leave it incomplete. Because the question this show keeps returning to is not what Rose did, but what we make of her now. In the long evening after the credits, when there is nothing left for her to do or say, there is a version of Rose Quartz it is tempting to settle on, in which she is, plainly and simply, the villain of her own story. She lied to her sisters, and to her army, and to her best friend. She bubbled Bismuth alive for thousands of years to keep a moral argument from becoming a moral problem. She left a Spinel in a garden. She wounded Pink Pearl. She built a war on a planet that was not asking to be defended in her terms. She ordered Pearl to keep her name secret forever. regardless of consequence. She left Steven a body that did not entirely belong to him. By the time you list all of it, it is a damning list. The show is not afraid of the list. Steven Universe Future, in particular, lets the list be said out loud. By Steven, by Pearl, by Bismuth, by the people who knew her best. There is another version of Rose Quartz it is also tempting to settle on, in which she is a hero whose mistakes were the unavoidable cost of doing the right thing. She walked away from being a god queen of an empire. She refused to participate in a project that would have killed every living thing on a planet she did not need to care about. She gave a Pearl a sword and called her a person. She gave a Ruby and a Sapphire each other. She gave Bismuth a forge and a cause. She gave Amethyst a family. She gave Greg a chance at something he had never imagined. She gave Steven a life. By that list, she is one of the great moral figures of the show's universe. The show is not afraid of this list either. The early seasons and their warmth are a quiet hymn to it. The position the show actually lands on by the end of Steven Universe Future is neither of these. It is something quieter and harder. Rose Quartz in the show's argument was a person of enormous moral imagination and enormous moral blind spots, and she was both at the same time. She could see what was wrong with the empire she had been born into, and could not see what was wrong with the way she carried her own household. She could imagine a world in which a Ruby and a Sapphire might be in love, and could not imagine staying in touch with a friend she had asked to wait. She could feel the rebellion against tyranny as a personal vocation, and could not feel that her own conduct of the rebellion was producing tyrannical little choices of its own. She was not evil. She was not pure. She was, the show keeps suggesting, someone who genuinely believed in her cause and who genuinely behaved with the carelessness of someone who had once been told she was supposed to rule the universe. Old habits of power do not vanish because you change your clothes. This is in some ways the most adult thing the show ever says. It is, after all, an animated children's program. It would have been within its rights to leave Rose as a tragic saint, the way most heroic ancestor figures in animated stories are left. It chose, instead, to ask whether a person who had done good things could also have done careless, harmful ones, and whether you could love them without pretending the harmful ones did not happen. The argument Steven Universe makes across its years of broadcast and its movie and its limited series is that you can. You can love an ancestor without forgiving everything they did. You can carry their gemstone without paying their bills forever. You can be your mother's son without becoming her. You can break the chain. There are a few smaller details about Rose's life and afterlife that we should not skip past, because they round out the picture and because the show takes them seriously. One is her relationship with the various human places of Beach City. Rose, the show implies, knew Beach City for a long time before Greg arrived. The mayor in the early seasons, Mayor Dewey, mentions encountering her before. The owner of Funland, Mr. Smiley, has stories. There is a recurring theme that Rose was a kind of local legend long before Steven was born. The pink woman on the beach, the pink woman who showed up at fairs, the pink woman who attended the founding of half the town's traditions. The show treats her, in these moments, with affection. She loved this town. She loved its small commercial pleasures. She loved its fireworks and its boardwalk food and its donut shop and its bakery. She loved it, the show implies, not in spite of its smallness, but because it was small. A town small enough that she could be a person inside it, rather than a diamond above it. Another detail is her relationship with the broader world of Earth outside Beach City. The show does not say much about this, but it implies, in small ways, that Rose traveled. There are flashbacks that suggest she had visited places around the world over the centuries. There is the 4th season episode 3 Gems and a Baby, where we see her interacting with young Steven moments after his birth, and she comes across as a person who has lived through more eras than the family can name. There is the implication, never spelled out, that some of Earth's quietly inexplicable little legends, the appearances of the Pink Lady in old stories, might have been her. The show never confirms any of this. It only gives the impression of a being who had been on this planet for thousands of years and who had, in that time, accumulated more memory than she knew what to do with. A third detail is the question of her healing tears, and the way the show eventually addresses the question of why she did not heal everyone she could have. We have already talked about the limits of her power. There is, in addition, the question of selection. Rose, with the kind of healing she had, could have spent her entire post-war life touring the planet healing injured humans. She did not. She seems to have largely kept her tears for gems and for emergencies. The show, very gently, raises the implication that this restraint was not entirely innocent. There is an argument fans have made, and which the show winks at in places, that Rose was, in a long-range way, still operating as a high-ranking authority figure with the right to choose who deserved her grace and who did not. She decided who to heal. She decided which corrupted gems to bubble and which to leave in the wild. She decided what to do with her power, and the decisions, taken together, painted a picture of someone who could not quite stop being a diamond, even when she swore she was something else. Let us walk back gently through some of the specific scenes and episodes that, on rewatch, take on different shapes in light of all this. Because part of what gives Rose's story its weight is the way the show seeds it across so many episodes that initially seemed about something else. The portrait above the temple door is the simplest example. Across the very first episodes of the show, the portrait hangs there. A tall woman in a flowing dress, smiling down. It is, in the first season, the iconography of Mother. By the second season, it has become an iconography of mystery. By the fifth season, it has become, in retrospect, kind of confession. A diamond on a wall, in the form of a quartz, watching her son try to clean up after her, smiling the smile of someone whose smile has been holding a lot in for a very long time. In the very first episode of the show, Gem Glow. In the first season, Stephen is trying to summon his weapon. He is a small, chubby boy who eats ice cream and runs around. Pearl, Garnet, and Amethyst stand around him, trying to coax it out. He fails over and over. He does not, in that first episode, even know what his weapon is, because the truth is that his weapon is a shield, not a sword. And the show has not yet told us that. We do not learn until later that Rose Quartz, although famous in legend for her sword, was at her heart a defensive gem. Her primary weapon was her shield. She bubbled rather than shattered. She protected rather than attacked. Stephen, in his early seasons, manifests his shield first. He learns to bubble before he learns to fight. There is a very deliberate piece of writing here that the show only fully unfolds later. Rose Quartz. The quartz was supposed to be a soldier. Rose Quartz, the person, was a guardian. She protected what mattered to her with everything she had. Stephen, her son, has the same instinct. He is, in the deep structure of the show, his mother's child in the kindest possible reading. He is built to protect. The healing scene in an indirect kiss in the first season is also worth lingering on. The show stages it in a slow domestic way. Stephen discovers his ability to heal Amethyst's cracked gem. The other crystal gems are visibly moved. There is a brief image of Pearl looking at Stephen with a particular kind of wet-eyed pride, and the implication, on rewatch, is that she is seeing something she had not allowed herself to expect to see again. She is seeing Rose's power coming through the boy. It is one of the early moments where Pearl, despite herself, lets the line between Stephen and Rose blur. The show does not condemn her for it. It only watches her quietly and lets her be sad about it. The episode Lion 3, straight to video, in the first season, where Stephen finds the VHS tape, is the show's central scene of Rose's voice speaking directly to her son. The way it is staged is the show at its most controlled. Stephen sits on his bed in the lighthouse. He puts the tape in. He watches it. The room is dim. The light comes from the screen. Rose is, in the tape, very pregnant, sitting in front of the camera, and she is speaking, and she is, on this rewatch, saying things that mean both what the original season meant and something else under it. She tells Stephen, in the warm voice the show has trained us to associate with motherhood, that he is going to be wonderful. She tells him she cannot wait to be a part of him. She tells him she has had a long life. She tells him, with the small wry smile of someone telling the truth in a way that nobody will catch, that she has had several long lives, in fact, and that she is delighted to give them up to be him. On first watch, this reads as a soft maternal blessing. On rewatch, it reads as a confession. A diamond is saying farewell to all of her empire and electing instead to become a small biracial half-human boy from a coastal town. She is, in the strict show terms, choosing him over everything she ever was. And she is doing so, the show keeps reminding us, by ceasing to be. The episode Rose's Scabbard in the late first season is, on rewatch, almost unbearable. Pearl takes Stephen to the snowy mountain. They are looking for the scabbard for the sword Stephen now carries inside Lion. They find Rose's old armory. They find her old palanquin. They find a chamber full of objects from her past. And Pearl, in this episode, lets Stephen see her grief at full strength for the first time. She tells him she does not know what she is for, without Rose. She tells him that Rose chose Greg over her. She tells him, in essence, that the entire shape of her existence was built around being the second person after Rose in every room. After Rose, she did not know where she was supposed to stand. On rewatch, after the reveal, this episode is what it really has been the entire time, which is Pearl trying, in the only way she is allowed, to talk to Stephen about how lonely she has been. She cannot say his mother was Pink Diamond. She cannot say she swung the sword. She cannot say she has been ordered to be silent. So she takes him to a mountain that has the scabbard, but not the sword, and the scabbard, but not the sword, is, in some sense, exactly what her life has been since Rose gave it up. The fusion arc across the first 2 seasons also has Rose embedded in it. Rose was a fusion of a kind herself, in retrospect, a fusion of a diamond and a quartz disguise. The show treats fusion as the most sacred act in gem culture, and Rose was, in some sense, fused into a shape that hid her. When Steven first fuses with Connie in the episode Alone Together in the first season, the form that emerges, Stavani, is treated by the gems as an extraordinary breakthrough. Garnet, in particular, looks at Stavani the way one might look at a holy thing. The implication, on rewatch, is that Garnet sees in Stavani a kind of echo of what Rose was, a fusion of 2 beings into one, with both still present, both still loved. Rose, who lived as a fused identity for thousands of years, never told Garnet this is what she had been doing. Garnet only finds out at the end of the run. But the show treats Steven and Connie's fusion throughout the series as a kind of inheritance from Rose, a way of being 2 and 1 at the same time that Rose had quietly modeled all along. The 3rd season episode Bismuth, the one in which Bismuth tells the truth about how she was bubbled, is the first episode of the show that openly admits Rose Quartz did something that was wrong. Before Bismuth, the show had let us assume Rose was, in essence, faultless. After Bismuth, we know she was capable of a cruelty designed to keep her own moral comfort. The show stages this very deliberately. Bismuth, in the episode, gives a speech about the war that is, in retrospect, the show's first quiet airing of the case against Rose. He accuses Rose of being unwilling to do what the war required. He accuses her of using the rebellion as a kind of stage on which to feel good, rather than a campaign actually meant to win. She is, in some ways, the first dissenting voice the show ever lets us hear about Rose. And Steven, in the episode, sides with his mother. He defends her. He says that he believes there must have been a reason. He is, at that point in his life, still the small boy who believes his mother was perfect. By the end of Steven Universe Future, he will not be. But Bismuth is where the cracks first show. We should also note, because it is important, that the show always frames Rose's relationships with humans with affection and with a careful sense of consent. Greg, in particular, is given the dignity of being a person who chose her and was chosen by her. The show is careful, in Story for Steven and We Need to Talk and Greg the Babysitter, to depict their relationship as one Greg pushed for, not one Rose imposed on him. He is the one who fell in love first. He is the one who insisted on being treated as a person. And by the time of Steven's existence, the show implies, the love between them had become genuine on both sides. Greg, the show insists, across every appearance, was loved by Rose. The form their love took was unusual, and the price of their love was high. But Greg, of all the people in Rose's life, was probably the one she came closest to being a real person with. He saw her age. He saw her without the audience of her family of revolutionaries. He sang her songs in cheap recording studios. He drove her around in a van, and when she died, he raised the boy she left him without ever pretending the boy was her replacement. There is a quiet sweetness in the way the show frames Greg's grief, scattered across the whole series. He does not weep openly very often. He smiles, mostly. He plays the guitar sometimes. He has, in his small, simple way, a kind of grace about it. The 3rd season episode Mr. Greg is the clearest example. Greg, having received an unexpected legal settlement, takes Steven and Pearl to a hotel and tries, in his own way, to organize a reconciliation between himself and Pearl over the woman they both loved. The episode is, in form, a musical. It is, in substance, 2 people who have been competing for years over a woman who is no longer there agreeing, finally, that the boy they are both raising together is more important than either of their own grief. The song they sing at the end, Both of You, is sung to Steven, by both of them in unison, and the implication is one of the most generous beats the show ever offers. Greg and Pearl, who could not stand each other for years, have arrived at a place where they can sit side by side and love the same boy without competing about it. Rose, by this point, is many years gone. The show is gentle about that. Her absence becomes, by Mr. Greg, less like an open wound and more like a chair her people have learned to leave empty without bitterness. Across the show's run, there are also smaller scenes that are easy to overlook on first watch, but become significant on the second. There is the 1st season episode Lion 2, the movie, in which Steven and Connie watch an old film called Dogcopter, and the way Steven shares his mother's old fascination with Earth's small popular media. There is the third season episode Restaurant Wars, where Steven plays at being a crystal gem in a low-stakes town comedy, and the way his casual ease with strangers reads, retrospectively, like a soft echo of Rose's curiosity about humans. There is the fourth season episode Buddy's Book, in which we follow an old human explorer named Buddy through a journal of his travels with the crystal gems centuries before Steven was born. We see Rose in this episode the way a human contemporary saw her, as a kind, generous, somewhat distant force, and we see the human Buddy quietly come to love her without ever quite understanding her. It is, in its small way, a portrait of how Rose looked to the people she befriended along the way. She was warm. She was strange. She was somehow not entirely there. She was always a little bit diamond inside the quartz. The healing of the corrupted gems which arrives in pieces across the late 5th season and the run of Steven Universe Future also reframes Rose's legacy in a way worth lingering on. For thousands of years, the crystal gems lived under the assumption that nothing could be done for the corrupted gems beyond bubbling and storing them. Rose had tried, the show implies, in her time. She had wept onto them. She had used every trick she had. None of it had worked. The corruption, the show eventually reveals, was caused by the combined attack of the 3 remaining diamonds, and required in the end the combined intervention of all of them, plus Steven, as Pink, to reverse. There is, in this fact, an awful kind of poetry. The wound the corrupted gems carried could only be healed by the people who had caused it. Rose could not heal them on her own no matter how hard she cried, because she alone was not what had made them sick. She had been 1/4 of a diamond attack that needed all 4 parts to undo. By withholding her presence from the others for thousands of years, by hiding inside Rose Quartz, she had made the cure impossible to assemble. The reading the show invites here is one of its harshest. Rose's refusal to be Pink Diamond in the long run was part of why the corrupted gems could not be healed. By keeping the secret, she kept the cure incomplete. Only when Steven, holding her gem, agreed to act in her place, did the 4 diamonds finally combine and heal the wounded. This is, in some sense, the moment in the show where Rose's choices are most clearly weighed and found wanting. She had thought of herself as a healer for thousands of years. She had kept the corrupted gems carefully bubbled as evidence of her devotion to them, but she had not been able to heal them. And the reason she had not been able to heal them was, in part, that she had not been willing to be who she really was. What the show is making clear here is, again, quiet but firm. Some kinds of healing only happen if you're willing to be honest. Some debts cannot be paid in disguise. Steven, by stepping into Pink Diamond's place at the end of Change Your Mind, did what Rose had refused to do. He told the truth. He stood with his family. He let the wound be fully acknowledged. And then the healing began. It is also worth saying that the show is gentle about all of this. It does not have anyone shout at Rose's portrait. It does not have anyone wreck her armory or burn her image in effigy. It does not have Steven curse her name. There is, by the time of Steven Universe Future, a slow, settled, mature kind of grief for what she did, and a slow, settled, mature kind of gratitude for what she gave. Pearl, by the end, can talk about Rose in the past tense without breaking. Garnet, by the end, can revisit the moment of her own emergence with a calmer eye. Bismuth, by the end, is back in her forge, building new weapons for new uses. Spinel, by the end, is living on Homeworld with the diamonds. Greg, by the end, has built a small life in Beach City with his music and his car wash and his memories. The world Rose left has, in the end, learned to live around the shape of her absence. And the boy who carries her gem has, in the end, made his way out the gate. There are still loose threads, of course. The show, mercifully, does not tie all of them. There is no scene in which Rose's ghost appears and apologizes to anyone. There is no posthumous letter. There is no surviving recording in which she sums up her life. The 2 recordings she did leave, the VHS tape for Steven and the second tape for Greg, are the only direct words from her that the show ever gives us, and they were both recorded before she had any way of knowing how the rest of the story would unfold. She did not get a last word. She left the last words to her people. And the people, in the show's argument, did better with that than she might have done herself. They got to decide who she had been. They got to be honest about the parts they could not forgive, and warm about the parts they were grateful for, and forgiving about the parts that were complicated. That is, the show implies more or less what we get when someone we love dies. We do not get them. We get to make the version of them we live with for the rest of our lives. The crystal gems made theirs. Steven made his. The show invites us to make ours. Behind the scenes, in the real world, the show was created and largely shaped by Rebecca Sugar. a storyboard artist who had previously worked on Adventure Time and who pitched Steven Universe to Cartoon Network in the early 2010s. The show ran from 2013 when it premiered through to 2020 when Steven Universe Future ended. Across that span, Sugar and her team built one of the most quietly ambitious arcs in animated television, threading the secret of Rose's identity through hundreds of episodes without giving it away, building a moral framework around fusion, consent, gender, love, and grief that the network rarely had to interfere with, and producing a piece of children's animation whose final season is, by general agreement, about post-traumatic stress, the difficulty of self-regulation, and the ways adolescents can absorb the unresolved damage of the previous generation. The show was, in its production history, a difficult thing to make. It was repeatedly rescheduled, occasionally censored, often left in production limbo for stretches at a time. The fact that the long arc landed at all is, in some sense, a small miracle of long-form storytelling. I will not speculate about anything Sugar herself has not chosen to say publicly. What is undeniable, in the documented record, is that the team behind the show held the secret of Pink Diamond and Rose Quartz from the beginning and waited until they could land it properly. They waited until the audience was old enough in some way to bear it, and then they laid the truth down very gently. This brings us, in a long arc, to what the show is finally doing with the figure of Rose Quartz, and to why she remains, even after all of these revelations and reckonings and apologies, a beloved character in the show's fan culture. She remains beloved, I think, for two reasons that the show makes very explicit. One is that her rebellion, however carelessly conducted, was a real rebellion. She did break a cycle. She did say no to a system that had been saying yes to itself for millions of years. She did invent, on a small scale and within a small group of people, a way of being a gem that nobody had been allowed to invent before. She gave Pearl her own thoughts. She gave Garnet her own existence. She gave Bismuth her own forge. She gave Amethyst, however imperfectly, a family. She gave Greg a strange and brief but real love. She gave Steven the chance to be alive. The list of people who exist as themselves because Rose Quartz refused to be Pink Diamond is long, and the show keeps it in front of us. Even Spinel, at the end of the movie, is alive. Even Pink Pearl in volleyball is alive. The carelessness took, but the giving also gave. The argument the show makes is that both lists are real, and that the second list is real even after you read the first one. The other reason she remains beloved is that her son, the small boy who inherited her gem and her debts, did not curse her. He could have. Many fictional sons in such positions do. He did not. Steven, across his own long arc, chose again and again to read his mother's choices in the most generous available light without lying to himself about the harder light underneath. He confronted Pearl with what Pearl had been ordered to do, and he forgave her. He confronted Bismuth with the truth of her bubbling, and he brought her home. He confronted Spinel with the long centuries of her abandonment, and he flew her back to her family. He confronted the Diamonds with the truth of their sister, and he asked them to do better. He did all of this carrying his mother's gem in his body, and by the end of Steven Universe Future, when he finally broke, it was not because he hated his mother. It was because he had spent his entire adolescence cleaning up after her without ever being allowed to ask her, or anyone, how he was supposed to do that. That is, in the end, the moral the show offers about Rose Quartz, and it is one of the most generous ones a long-form children's show has ever offered about a parent. The lesson is not that mothers are saints. The lesson is not that mothers are villains. The lesson is that mothers are people, and that people who do enormous things for love also leave debts behind them that their children sometimes have to settle. The lesson is also that you do not, as the child, owe anyone the dissolution of yourself in order to settle those debts. You can pay some of them. You can decline others. You can leave Beach City in a van. You can love your mother and not be her. You can carry her gem and not let it run you. You can, in the end, be your own person, even when the people around you keep mistaking you for someone else. There is one more strand of the story we should walk through carefully because it is the strand that lives most fully in Steven Universe Future, and that gives Rose Quartz's legacy its final weight. That is the strand of the gems who do not live in Beach City, the ones scattered across what used to be Pink Diamond's territory and across the broader empire, and who are, by the time of Steven Universe Future, slowly working out what Rose's existence means for them. The most striking among these are the Rose Quartzes themselves, the bubbled colony soldiers who were imprisoned by Homeworld for the supposed crime of being the same kind of gem as the killer of Pink Diamond. In Steven Universe Future, in an early episode called Rosebuds, This group of bubbled gems is brought home. They are released into Beach City. We meet, in the run of episodes that follows, a few of them by name. One of them, who calls herself Rose, takes up residence in Beach City and tries to imagine a life for herself there. The others scatter to find their own ways to be. The show treats this group with a great deal of careful warmth. Each Rose Quartz is her own person. They are not interchangeable. They have their own voices, their own preferences, their own small mannerisms. The reading the show invites is one of correction. For thousands of years, Homeworld treated these gems as a single suspect category, the Rose Quartz problem. All of them bubbled together because one of them supposedly did something. Rose Quartz, the singular figure, had absorbed all of their identities into her name. Once she is gone, once the truth is out, they get their identities back. They get to be plural. They get to be people. There is something deeply right about the show choosing to spend time on this. The figure of Rose Quartz in the show's universe has been so individual, so loaded, so central to everything that has been happening, that it is easy to forget she was named after an entire kind of gem. The show, in Steven Universe Future, quietly reminds us that the Rose Quartzes the colony produced were not all aspects of her. They were their own. They had been collateral in a war they did not understand, and now, in the post-war calm, they get to be themselves. What the show is doing here, in essence, is offering restitution. The Empire bubbled a population for the supposed sins of an individual. The truth comes out. The population is freed. The individual is gone. There is no neat justice to be had, but there is the small justice of letting the survivors live their lives. And the show, very gently, lets them live. The diamonds in the same period also have to do a kind of slow work. The 5th season ends with the 3 remaining diamonds beginning a process of acknowledgement that, by the standards of any empire in any human story, is shockingly humble. They have, by the end of Change Your Mind, accepted that their sister staged her own death. They have accepted that the rebellion against them was something they should have listened to, rather than crushed. They have accepted that the corrupted gems were victims and not enemies. They have accepted that their own family was the problem. In Steven Universe Future, we see them slowly try to learn how to live with this. They visit Beach City. They visit the school. They sit awkwardly in human-sized rooms designed for people much smaller than them. They try, in the way of suddenly self-aware, powerful people, to be friendly. White Diamond, in particular, has a strange and quiet journey. She has been, for the entire run of the show before this, an aloof colonial mother whose voice could make her sisters small. By Steven Universe Future, she is trying to be present in a way that, to a creature like her, is genuinely difficult. She seems to be embarrassed. She seems to be unsure of herself. She seems, in some real sense, to have been broken open by Steven's refusal to be her sister. She is, in her own way, mourning Pink, and trying, at the same time, to make sure she does not break Steven the way she once broke Pink. This is the part of the story of Rose Quartz that I find most moving on rewatch. The diamonds, in the original conception of the show, are presented as something close to gods. They are vast, ancient, terrible, beautiful, capable of destroying planets with a thought. The show, by the end, lets them be, instead, parents. Bad parents, mostly. Parents who, in their grief over the loss of their youngest, were able to glimpse what they had done wrong as parents. Parents who, eventually, were able to face their dead daughter's son and apologize to him for the way they had treated her. That is not, in the strict sense, what Pink Diamond would have wanted. Pink Diamond wanted out. Pink Diamond did not want a tearful reconciliation with her sisters. Pink Diamond wanted Rose Quartz and her rebellion and her life on Earth. But it is, in some quiet way, the closest thing the show offers her to a posthumous gift. The sisters she ran from finally heard her. Too late, after she was gone, but they heard her. The show, in its final stretch, also leaves us with a kind of running motif that I think is worth pointing out. Across Steven Universe Future, again and again, we see characters look at the portrait of Rose above the door and not say very much. Pearl looks at it. Garnet looks at it. Greg looks at it. Steven looks at it. None of them in the final season makes a speech to the portrait. None of them denounces it or kneels in front of it or weeps for it. They look. They turn away. They go on with their lives. The show, in not making a big speech of the portrait, is making a different kind of statement. The dead, in the end, do not need our speeches. They need us to keep living. The portrait will be there as long as the temple is there. The work of being alive happens in the rooms around it. The boy will leave the room. The boy will come back. The portrait will keep smiling. The life will keep happening. The crystal gems, after thousands of years of vigil over a dead leader, after years of vigil over an absent mother, finally in Steven Universe future, stop vigiling. They start living. There is one more pair of episodes I want to mention before we move toward closing, because they are, in their small ways, the warmest scenes the show ever gives Rose. One is the 4th season episode 3 Gems and a Baby, which is, despite its very late placement in the show, a flashback to the days immediately around Steven's birth. We see, in this episode, the crystal gems try to take care of an infant Steven without Greg around. We see Pearl panic. We see Amethyst try her best. We see Garnet, in her quiet way, hold him. And we see, in a few brief frames in the climax of the episode, a vision of Rose, glowing inside Steven, briefly visible to her family, looking at the infant boy with the kind of warmth a parent looks at a child with. We do not technically know whether this vision is real, or whether it is the family's wishful projection. The show leaves it ambiguous, but the way it is staged, with Garnet's tears and Pearl's stillness and Amethyst's small sob, is unmistakable. Whatever the vision is, in that moment, it is a family being given one more glimpse of someone they loved, and then it is gone, and then the boy cries, and then the family takes care of him. The other is the 5th season episode A Single Pale Rose, the reveal episode itself, which I have already talked about at length, but I want to come back to one specific image inside it. Inside Pearl's gem, in the oldest chamber, we see a fountain. We see Pink in rose form, standing beside it. We see Pearl, much smaller, much more Pearl-like, looking up at her. We see Rose smile, the same smile from the portrait, and reach out her hand. And we see Pearl take it. It is, in the small visual vocabulary of the show, a moment of consent. Pearl was given a choice in that fountain garden to be Rose's, to follow her, to give up the identity of being Pink Diamond's Pearl, and to become something else with her. Pearl took the hand. The argument the show is making, very quietly, is that even in the relationships where Rose's hierarchy of power made full consent complicated, there was still real love. Pearl did not have to fall in love with Rose. She did. The fact that she could not say no does not erase the fact that she said yes. The show, at the end of A Single Pale Rose, is not asking us to think Pearl was a victim only. It is asking us to think Pearl was a person who, inside the constraints of her existence, made the deepest and most enduring commitment of her long life, and made it freely as far as she was able. That is also part of Rose Quartz's legacy, and the show makes sure we feel it. There is, in the broader fan culture around Steven Universe, a healthy debate about whether the show was hard enough on Rose, given everything she did. Some fans argue that Steven Universe Future, in particular, lets her off the hook by routing the trauma through Steven, rather than through any final reckoning with the woman herself. Other fans argue that the show was, if anything, harder on Rose than necessary, in the way that the long Pink Diamond reveal recontextualized every moment of her early portrayal into an act of deception. There is no clean answer to that argument, and I will not pretend to give you one. The show is the show. It says what it says. And what it says, at its strongest, is that the work of being a person, of being a parent, of being a leader, and of being any of these things badly, does not end when you die. It ends when the people you left behind have, in their own way, decided what to keep and what to forgive and what to let go. The crystal gems made those choices. They are still making them. And Steven, free of Beach City, is in the middle of making his own. There are a few smaller textures of the story I want to walk through before the outro, because they are the kinds of details that round out the picture and because they are the parts of the show that most reward slow rewatching at night. The first is the visual design of Rose Quartz herself. The show, in the way of long-form animation, gives her a very specific silhouette that the audience comes to know without thinking about. She is tall. She is wide. She has a huge mass of curly pink hair that surrounds her head like a halo. She wears a long, sleeveless white dress with a star cut out over her stomach, exposing the gemstone. She is, in her physical design, soft. She is, in her physical design, decidedly not the angular, sharp, geometric silhouette that the other diamonds carry. Pink Diamond, when we see her in flashback, is sharp, small, pointed, with hair pulled up into stylized triangular shapes. Rose Quartz, by contrast, is round, soft, flowing. The argument the show is making with this design is one of self-transformation. Pink chose, when she became Rose, to be everything that her family of origin was not. She made herself soft. She made herself large. She made herself maternal. She made herself, in some sense, a contradiction of the body she had been given. The reading the show invites is that her form was a kind of statement, a long, slow refusal of the geometry she had been born into. It is worth noting, too, that her sword, the curved pink blade we see Stephen and Connie carry across the show, has its own little visual story. The blade is forged by Bismuth. It is, by design, a weapon meant to defeat the corporeal forms of gems without shattering them, by separating the body of light from the gem so that the gem can be safely contained. Rose, the show implies, used this sword almost exclusively in the war, and used it for that specific purpose. She did not use it to shatter, she used it to incapacitate. After the war, she put it away. By the time of the show's present day, the sword is in lion's mane, kept like an old uniform, occasionally drawn out by Stephen and Connie when an enemy needs to be poofed. The argument the show is making with the sword, in its strict design and use, is consistent with the argument the show makes about everything else of Rose's. The weapon was always built to preserve, not to kill. Rose's principal violence was contained violence. She would poof a gem and bubble her. She would not shatter her. She refused, even at her most extreme, to take the final step. And yet, as we have noted, she did take it in one case. She did poof and bubble Bismuth and let everyone believe Bismuth had been shattered, and she did so to keep a moral conversation from happening inside her army. The sword is, in some sense, a clean weapon. The bubbles are not always clean. The strawberry battlefield, where Stephen and the crystal gems wander in several first-season episodes, is another part of the show's world that takes on a heavier meaning the more you know about Rose. It is a wide open field, dotted with enormous strawberries the size of pumpkins, scattered with the discarded weapons of gems who fought there thousands of years ago. We never get a definitive count of how many gems died there. The show implies many. Pearl, in particular, is haunted by the place. The first season episode Serious Stephen, although it is mostly about something else, includes a scene of Pearl walking through the battlefield with a deliberate kind of attention, almost as if she is paying her respects. In light of the reveal, the battlefield becomes something even sadder. It is, in literal terms, a place where soldiers died for the rebellion of a diamond who never told them they were dying for a diamond. The strawberries themselves, by most accounts pieced together from fan readings and quiet hints, were possibly seeded by Rose herself, an attempt at planting something living in a place where so much had been lost. They are, in a way, a small posthumous gesture by the leader of the side that won. She filled the field of the dead with fruit. It does not undo the deaths, but it is, in its small, careful way, very much a Rose thing to do. The Sky Spire, which we visit with Stephen and Pearl early in the first season, also reads differently on rewatch. It is a tall, floating spire above the clouds with a small chamber at its peak. The show implies, in many quiet ways, that Rose used to spend time in places like this. We see scenes painted on the walls of old crystal gem outposts. We see her old belongings. We see, in some sense, her hideaways. On rewatch, after the reveal, these become small portraits of places a diamond used to go to be alone. The reading the show invites is that Rose, even after she chose Earth, had places she went to be away from her own people. She had a tower in the sky. She had an armory in a snowy mountain. She had a chamber under the temple. She had lion's mane. She had her own pocket dimension. She had, in some sense, many small private rooms, each of which contained a piece of her she did not share with anyone else. Even her crystal gems, the show implies, did not know everything she had stored. The argument the show is making with all of these hidden rooms is, again, a quiet one. Rose was not a person who shared her whole self with anyone. Not with Pearl. Not with Garnet. Not with Bismuth. Not with Amethyst. Not with Greg. Not with Stephen. Each of them got a part of her. None of them got all of her. And the rooms, scattered around the planet and beyond, are still there, holding the parts that did not make it into anyone's memory. A note here on what is and is not confirmed in the show, because I want to be careful with this. The show implies a great deal about Rose's inner life. It does not often confirm it. We do not have a single monologue in which Rose tells us, in her own words, how she felt about being Pink Diamond. We do not have her account of why she did what she did to Bismuth. We do not have her version of her decision to let Spinel wait. We have, instead, the testimony of the people who knew her, who loved her, who lost her. We have Pearl. We have Garnet. We have Greg. We have Bismuth. We have, eventually, the Diamonds. And we have Stephen, who never met her, but who is, in some literal sense, the closest thing to her testimony that remains. Stephen, the show implies more and more, is what Rose chose to leave instead of a will. She left a small boy. She left a small boy to figure it out. And the small boy, by the end of the show, has figured most of it out. He has chosen what to keep and what to leave behind. He has, in the end, freed her by being a person rather than her continuation. There are also a few small theories about Rose's life that the show invites without committing to, and I want to flag them as theory rather than canon. Some fans have argued that Rose's healing tears were, in fact, an aspect of Pink Diamond's own latent powers, and that other diamonds might have had analogous abilities that we never saw. The show does not confirm this. Other fans have argued that the corruption attack from the diamonds was meant on Pink's part as a kind of mercy to keep her people alive in some form rather than letting them be shattered outright. The show does not confirm this either. Other fans have argued that Steven's many mysterious abilities, including the half-human aspects we do not see in any other gem, may have been deliberately seeded by Rose with a long-term goal of producing exactly what Steven becomes. The show does not confirm this. These are all theories, and they have their merits, and they have their counters. None of them is settled. I mention them because they live in the long conversation around the show, and because if you spend time in the show's fandom, you will encounter them, and because they are part of the texture of how Rose Quartz is remembered. But they are not facts. The facts the show gives us, plainly, are the ones we have walked through together. The rest is interpretation, and the interpretation belongs to each viewer. What we can say plainly by the end of the show's run is that Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond, that she rebelled against her family for reasons that began as restlessness and grew into genuine moral conviction, that she founded the crystal gems alongside Pearl and welcomed Garnet, Bismuth, and Amethyst, that she fought in a war whose toll she could not fully recover from, that she abandoned a friend named Spinel in a garden, that she wounded a Pearl in a fit of temper, that she bubbled Bismuth for refusing to compromise on a tactical question, that she fell in love with Greg Universe, that she chose to give up her physical form to give birth to Steven, that she ordered her Pearl to keep her name secret forever, that her gem now lives in the belly of a small boy who has, against the odds, decided to be a person rather than her continuation, and that the people she left behind have, by the close of Steven Universe's future, learned how to grieve her honestly. That is, in the end, the entire story of Rose Quartz, as the show tells it. Everything else is in some way a footnote, and the footnotes, as we have seen, are long and many and beautiful. If you sit back from the entire arc and try to see the shape of Rose Quartz's life as a single shape, what you get, I think, is the shape of a refusal. She refused, very early, to be told what she was. She refused to be a diamond who oversaw the destruction of a planet. She refused to be the small, chastised youngest child in her family forever. She refused to follow the role her body had been built for. She refused to participate in the architecture of the Empire as it had been handed to her. And she paid for those refusals with a series of smaller refusals that, in aggregate, become the harder side of her legacy. She refused to tell Pearl she could speak. She refused to tell Bismuth she could disagree. She refused to go back for Spinel. She refused to admit, in front of her family of revolutionaries, that she had once been their enemy. She refused, in essence, to be honest with the people who had loved her the most. She refused to let them know who they were loving. And that final refusal, the one that runs underneath all of the others, is the one her son spent his entire life unwinding. If you watch Steven Universe Future with this in mind, the show becomes, in some ways, the story of Steven learning to refuse differently. He refuses to keep performing. He refuses to keep playing the role of his mother. He refuses to let the family around him keep mistaking him for her. He refuses to be the function. He refuses to be the symbol. He refuses to be the gem that solves everyone else's problems. He refuses, finally, in the second to last episode of the series, to keep himself together for everyone's sake any longer. And he breaks open, and he becomes the monster. And his family climbs onto the monster and tells him they are sorry. The kind of refusal he models by the end is not the kind his mother modeled. His mother's refusals were silent and lonely. His refusals are messy and visible, and accompanied by a family that has, at last, learned how to be one. That difference between a refusal carried in private and a refusal supported by people who love you is the difference the show is, in the end, asking us to see. There is also, in the long shadow of Rose's story, a comment the show keeps making about the way grief lives in the body. We have already talked about how Steven's powers, by the end of the show, begin to express what he is not allowing himself to say. We have talked about how Pearl for thousands of years could not say Rose's real name because her own mouth would not let her. We have talked about how Garnet, who's in herself a fusion, has had to learn to remain fused with herself across the changes that Rose's revelations have caused. These are all, in some way, the same idea. Bodies remember. Bodies act out. Bodies keep doing the things they have been trained to do long after the trainer's gone. Rose, having been Pink Diamond, kept doing things a diamond would do. Pearl, having been her pearl, kept doing things a pearl would do. Steven, having Rose's gem, keeps doing things Rose used to do, even when he himself has consciously chosen otherwise. What the show keeps coming back to is that the work of being your own person, especially when you have inherited someone else's stone, is the work of teaching your body to do new things. It is slow. It is repetitive. It is full of setbacks. It is, in the show's gentlest moments, possible. The very last image of Steven Universe Future, the closing shot of the series, is of Steven driving away from Beach City in his van. He is older, taller, slightly more rugged. He has a kind of small smile. The road ahead of him is open. He is, in the strict sense, alone. He is, in another sense, not. He is carrying his mother's gem. He is carrying his father's old habits of being on the road. He is carrying his family's love at his back. He is carrying everything that has been said in this entire story about Rose Quartz and what she did and did not do. He is carrying the corrected version of all of it, and he is going somewhere we do not get to see. The show, at the very last, gives us the privacy of his road. Whatever he becomes, whatever he sorts through, whatever he decides to keep and what he decides to leave behind, the show does not show us. It only shows us that he is driving, and, somewhere along the way, his mother is in the seat next to him, the way mothers always are when their children leave, and she is not saying anything. He is. He is humming, perhaps. He is talking to himself. He is making his own road songs. There is a small scene in Steven Universe Future, in the episode Growing Pains, which I want to mention because it is, in many ways, the moment the show makes the literal biological inheritance of Rose Quartz finally undeniable. Steven goes to see Connie's mother, Dr. Mahaswaran, because his body has been doing strange things, growing and shrinking unpredictably, stretching when he is upset, refusing to behave like a human body. He sits in her office. She examines him. She tries to diagnose what is happening to him, and eventually, very gently, she tells him that she cannot. He is not human enough for her to treat. The cells will not act like cells. The growth rate will not stabilize. The body he is in, in the strict medical sense, not behaving like the body of any creature she has been trained to understand. And then she tells him, in the next breath, that what he is going through, in the more general sense, has a name. It is what happens when a child has spent their early life absorbing the unresolved trauma of the people around them, and the body eventually runs out of ways to keep the trauma quiet. The argument the show is making in this scene, which it makes again and again across Steven Universe Future, is that there is no medical diagnosis for what Rose left her son. The closest available diagnosis is a human psychological one, and it is not enough on its own, because the body is not entirely human, and so the trauma has more places to go than it would in a strictly human body. Steven's powers in this reading are not a gift, they are an amplifier. They take whatever he is feeling, and they make it geographic. He grows, he shrinks, he glows pink, he bends physics, he becomes a building-sized monster. The mother who left him this body did not warn him that this was how it would behave. The mother who left him this body was, in some sense, not a body to begin with. Rose Quartz was a projection of light. She did not have to deal with growth pains. Steven does. And every time he does, the inheritance feels less and less like a blessing, and more like an unfinished sentence his mother left for him to finish. There is also, across the show, a recurring use of music to remember Rose, which I want to spend a moment on because music is one of the show's primary languages, and Rose is, in some real sense, present in the songs in a way she is not present anywhere else. There is the song Greg sings at his beachside grief moments. There are songs Steven sings about her, songs he has written without quite knowing he was writing them about her. There is the song from Mr. Greg, the one in which Pearl and Greg finally name aloud what they have been doing to each other for years, what we both shared. There is the song from We Need to Talk, in which Greg and Rose negotiate, in melody and harmony, the question of whether they can be in love. There is the song from The Answer, in which Garnet sings about meeting Sapphire. There is, in the special Change Your Mind, a whole sequence of songs about Steven trying to claim himself rather than Pink. Each of these songs is, in some sense, a small monument to Rose. The show, by giving each of them a tune, is letting Rose's people speak about her in a way they could not in prose. The reading the show invites is that grief, particularly grief for someone whose presence in your life was complicated, often refuses to be summarized in regular sentences. It needs a chord. It needs a chorus. It needs a small phrase that comes back. The Crystal Gems, who lost Rose, lost her in many ways, and they have many phrases that come back. None of those phrases sums her up. All of them together, taken across the run of the show, almost do. We should pause briefly before the outro on how the show treats the long emptiness between Rose's disappearance and Steven's understanding of her. There are, by my rough count, several hundred episodes of Steven Universe across all forms, and Rose is dead in the strict narrative present of every single one of them. She is, throughout, an absence. The crystal gems live in her absence. Greg lives in her absence. The town lives in her absence. The portrait hangs above the door in her absence. And it is, in some sense, the absence that gives the show its shape. The space she does not fill is, again and again, what the people of the show have to learn to fill themselves. Garnet has to be a leader, not because Rose is not there to lead, but because she has decided, in Rose's absence, that she is going to be one. Pearl has to become a teacher, not because Rose is not there to teach, but because she has decided, in Rose's absence, that she is going to be one. Amethyst has to grow up, not because Rose is not there to look up to, but because she has decided that she is going to grow up. The argument the show makes, very gently, is that the work of being a person, of being a family, of being a community, happens in the empty spaces left by the people who used to fill them. Rose's absence is, by the show's logic, what made the crystal gems become the crystal gems. They did not stop being a family when their leader vanished. They started being one in a new way. There is a quiet beauty in this idea, and I think it is one of the reasons Steven Universe has held the affection of so many people for so long. It is a show that takes seriously the work of grief. It does not pretend that anyone gets over anything quickly. It does not pretend that the right speech, given by the right person at the right moment, fixes everything. It lets Pearl be sad for hundreds of episodes. It lets Greg be wistful for hundreds of episodes. It lets the corrupted gems hover in their bubbles for hundreds of episodes. It lets Steven, by the end, finally fall apart for an entire limited series. The show is, in its bones, patient about loss. And Rose Quartz, the absent center of all of this loss, is the figure whose absence makes the patience necessary. She is the missing piece. The shape of her, the shape of where she should be standing, is the show's main character in disguise. Steven is what occupies the space where she was. But the space, the empty room, the missing voice, the unanswered question, is, in some structural sense, the protagonist of Steven Universe. The show, by the end of Steven Universe Future, has stopped feeling haunted in the way it once did. The lighthouse, which used to feel like a small sad shrine, becomes, in Steven Universe Future, just a small room with a bed in it. The temple, which used to feel like a tomb, becomes a school. The bubble room, which used to feel like a vault of regrets, becomes empty as the corrupted gems are released. Portrait, which used to feel like a watching eye, becomes just an old painting on a wall. The crystal gems in the last stretch have done what Rose herself could not do. They have processed her. They have, in the way that the living always have to do, learned to look at her image without flinching. That is the gift the show gives in the end to its main absent character. It lets her become survivable. It lets her be a person who used to be and who is now part of the past, rather than a permanent open wound in the present. It lets the people who loved her go on living. It lets the boy who is her gem go on growing. It lets the strange small love story, the strange small rebellion, the strange small failure, the strange small grace of her entire existence settle into history. And then there is the harder, more honest beat I want to land before the closing. By the end of the show, Rose Quartz is loved, but she is also small. She is not any longer the looming god of the early seasons. She is, in the way of every parent eventually for every child, a person of a particular size with a particular set of strengths and flaws, who lived a particular kind of life and made particular decisions and is gone. The argument the show is making, with extraordinary care, is that this is the right end state. Children should not, in the long run, see their parents as gods. The work of growing up is the work of bringing your parents down to size, not to insult them, not to dismiss them, to see them as people, not as forces, to see what they did and what they did not do, and to thank them for one and forgive them for the other and walk on. Steven, by the end, has done this for Rose. The show invites us, very gently, to do it for whoever it is that we, in our own lives, are still seeing too large. That, in the end, is the right place to leave her. Not in a tomb, not in a portrait, not in a recording, in the gem, in the boy, in the van, going. The show has spent years and a movie and a final limited series getting her here, Rose Quartz, who once stood in a white chamber on a planet far away and was told no, who once chose to disappear into a quartz disguise so that she could become a softer version of herself, who once seeded a rebellion that lost almost everyone it touched, who once fell in love with a man who needed her to be a person, who once chose to vanish into a child so that something new could begin, has finally, at the end of her show, made it through. The work she could not finish has been finished by her son. The lies she could not unsay have been unsaid by her son. The friends she could not return to have been returned to by her son. The family she could not face has been faced by her son. And the son, having done all of that, has driven away from the town that built itself around her absence. And he is going to find out who he is when he is not in her shadow. So now, if you have stayed with this all the way through, we come to the end. You have followed me through the small white chamber on Homeworld, through the palanquin on Earth, through the snowy mountain, through the strawberry battlefield, through the recording studio where Pearl made her ugliest fusion choice, through the boardwalk where Greg watched a tall pink woman come down off the wood, through the lighthouse bedroom where Steven watched the tape, through the trial on Homeworld, through the bedroom where Pearl finally showed him the truth, through the white chamber where his gem was pulled out, through the forest where he shattered Jasper, through the streets where he became the monster, and through the open road that the show finally let him drive down. That is the entire story of Rose Quartz, as the show is willing to tell it. The rest, as always, is what each of us takes from it. Steven Universe is, on the air, a children's show, and it ran for what was, in animation terms, a long time, from 2013 to 2020. In that time, it told one of the most patient and tender stories about a parent any animated show has tried to tell. It is a story about a mother who was not all good and not all bad, about a father who loved her without losing himself, about a son who carried her stone without becoming her, about a family of revolutionaries who learned slowly how to love a leader who lied to them, and about a town on a coast that, in the end, lets a teenager leave it without grudging him for going. There is, somewhere underneath all of the alien sci-fi and the gem fusion and the diamonds and the spaceships, a small, quiet story about how to grow up after your parents are gone, and how to be a person after the people who made you turn out to have been more complicated than you thought. That is the story the show tells. It is, I think, one of the better stories an animated series has tried to tell in our lifetime, and Rose Quartz, the strange, generous, careless, brilliant, careless again, beloved figure at the center of it, is one of the better characters its medium has produced. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.